Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Batcave. It is Sunday, June 29th, 2025, and skip a church again because my church is having another building project, and I really don't think that's the best thing to do during World War III. World War III is breaking out, you guys, and I'm not trying to keep doing eschatology updates, but somebody did hop on one of my older videos on Gog and Magog and Turkey and all that and challenge some of my propositions. And I think I probably made that at least a few years ago. Might have been up to 5 years ago. But I will say this, I've certainly grown in my understanding of linguistics and etymology and how to map out the Table of Nations since then. Some of these ideas that I put forward in my book on how to map out these nations and figure out who these guys are in end times prophecies are based on research I did in college, and I want to walk you guys through my background. I want to walk you through how I got those nations back then, and then I want to walk you through how you can get those nations and verify this stuff to people today, because this is important. All you need is a Bible and Wikipedia. That's it. Back when I was doing this, I was looking up obscure websites from different countries and stuff like this that most people didn't know, and I put most of the stuff together, and I have not changed much. Probably the biggest change that I've had in the whole Gog-Magog research was identifying Korea as Gog. That was the biggest change, and I think I did that around, I want to say it was around 2018 or 2019, so about 7 years ago. And again, I'm doing my Table of Nation research. I've always been into ancient history. And I just learned that there's these people called the Gok Turks and this people called Goguryeo, and I realized they're on either side of Mongolia. And I'm going, I think Gog is a son of Magog, and he just ended up having his own principalities, similar to how, you've got Judah and Israel. Judah was originally a subset of Israel, but then he has his own kingdom, and Israel diminishes, but Judah remains. Well, Gog seemed to basically outlast, it was before the Mongolian Empire, because the Mongolian Empire that gets big and covers all of Russia, that's going to be in the 13th century AD, but Gog is going to be a kingdom that is basically North Korea. It's all but the very southern part of South Korea, and then Manchuria, basically, which is now part of China, and it is it would butt right up to Mongolia. And then on the other side of Mongolia, you would have these people called the Gok Turks, which seem to be a mixture of people from Gog and the Turks. And these would probably honestly have become the predecessors to who were the Scythians. The Khazars seem to come from them. So a lot of these roving horse lords that are a mixture of Turks and Mongols seem to be descended from these Gok Turks, okay? And of course, they're denoted here in the 6th to 8th century AD. So you're talking about mixtures of people that probably go way back. But by this time, they're a thorough mixture of Gog and these Turks, so they're called Gok Turks, okay? These, just to trace back how old this is, and I'm going to show you guys. Goguryeo, which is it's called Goguryeo in around the time of Christ, and their kingdom's motto means son of God. It actually means son of the heavenly emperor. So they believe that their rulers are gods. Okay, way back here in 37 BC. Before this, it used to be called Jojoseon, and Jojoseon, I believe the Joj and Gog is the same thing. Again, you can have a hard G and a soft G, and when you get into etymology and linguistics and how things transliterate over time and across different language groups, going from a hard G to a soft G is not that strange, because again, it seems to be common that you have C's, CH's, K's, G's, For instance, the Gypt in Egypt is actually from Copt, which is Coptic, and there's the city. You're gonna have P's transliterate to F's, just like in Hebrew. You're gonna have basically a hard F and a soft F, which is a P and a PH. So you're gonna have a hard G and a soft G. You're gonna have a hard K sound and a soft K. So it's ch and K. And over time, if you're translating these languages to the next language over, and they don't know that from rote that is a hard K or a soft K, they're gonna just read it and they're gonna say, oh, that's and then so you're gonna see it being very common for hard Ks and soft Ks to happen. You're also gonna see things like, if you think of the letters NG, okay, we're never going to try to pronounce that GN, but we're also never going to put an NG at the beginning of the word. Well, if you go to Vietnam, they will. The common name Nguyen starts with an NG, okay? And so you're going to have these sounds that people are not used to saying on the other side. And so what they're going to do, this is a common thing. This is why it's common in African American vernacular to say axe instead of ask, because in their original languages that these guys spoke, it wasn't common to say something with an SK at the end of it. It was more a KS. And so it's not natural to them. And these things will transmit down lines of generations, just like it's common in East Asia for people to get L's and R's mixed up. Well, African Americans will get SK and KS mixed up. Okay, and well, white people do this too, okay? All language groups do this. You have to have a gift for language to be able to cross over to language groups and pronounce it the way they do. You'll look at it in writing, you'll hear them say it, and yet it's a common thing to mix up these little letters back and forth. And so when you're doing things like, for instance, Tagarma, who's Tagarma? Well, it's not too hard to take the G, and remember, vowels were not common to a lot of these old language groups, and take the G after the K, and then now you have Torgma, okay? That's not that far from Turkmen. If you have a hard G, G, transliterates to a K, Torkma, Turkmen, okay? So it's not that hard to see how these, if you have some understanding of how these tend to shift over time, it's not too hard to see how these become this. The other basic rule of thumb when you're mapping out the table of nations, you have to have a general idea of where people came from. If you want to say, for instance, that Magog is Turkey, where did the Mongolians come from then? Because Mongolian certainly sounds a whole lot more like Magog than Turkey does. Turkey sounds a whole lot more like Togarma than Magog does. So you have to account for where the different people groups came from. That should be your starting point. Well, for a frame of reference, I started studying this stuff before all this information. There was no Wikipedia when I started in college, okay? Maybe it was barely a fledgling of a thing, but it's gotten so much better in terms of information and research since then. And when I started learning this stuff, I studied under a professor at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He's retired now, but his expertise was in Bactrian coinage, and so he knew a lot about the horse lords of the ancient Central Asia. So just to get an idea where Bactria is, it's actually the region where Zoroaster is from. Okay, so Bactria is in eastern Iran, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, is Uzbekistan. And this literally was his PhD thesis. He was researching the coins from this kingdom to demonstrate that there was once a Bactrian kingdom that was minting coins and had this pretty substantial trade network basically between what became the Persian Empire and China. And this was a big deal for quite some time. And so, well, these Bactrians would have been considered Turkmen, but that was his expertise. And so what he was always showing us is the trends. And of course, he wasn't a Bible reader. I was. And he was actually very humble in terms of if I corrected him based on something the Bible said, he would listen. And so he would show us how, like, these horse lords, what they would do is essentially, remember, Gomer is going to be the oldest son of Japheth, and he's going to start over here in, near Ararat, and he's going to become the Cimmerians, okay? So Gomer again, the G becomes a hard G, becomes a C. Okay, so we look at the word and we say Cimmerians. It's probably more like Goguryeo, and then Cimmerians, and then someone used a C at some point in time, and we say Cimmerians. Okay, but we're wrong. It's the descendants of Gomer, and these people, you see Gamir as a center of theirs. They're going to be some of the first people who get the horses, and so you're going to see this widespread Cimmerians, and they're going to be able to notice you have these river systems that are going to flow into, this is the Sea of Azov, and this is the Black Sea, and this is the Caspian Sea. And because they have horses, they're going to be able to rove this whole territory between these two seas, and then they're going to be able to trade in both directions, okay? So notice they have this city here, and they're going to come in here and establish this Gamir. Now, this is probably part of Georgia or Azerbaijan right now, and then you have this kingdom beneath them, which is called Urartu, which is around the area of Ararat, okay? These would be descendants of theirs. You see there's a point in time where they're going to come down here, and you see them around the Medes right here, the Assyrians right here, and then the Phrygians right here. And people are going to look at that and be like, there you go, that's Turkey, right? No. These were invasions, incursions into these regions, and probably some of their people settled there, but that was not their main homeland. You got to remember, a lot of people were in this region right here. This used to be the capital of the Hittite Empire, okay? Then the Lydians, notice Lydia is over here. They're going to have this for a while. It eventually is going to become Turkey, like 2,000 years later. It's going to become Turkey. Or I'm sorry, no. It's the 20th century when this becomes Turkey. It becomes the Ottoman Empire, which are a branch of the Seljuk Turks that broke off to form the Ottoman Empire for a while, and then that's going to break down, and then this is going to become Turkey, okay? So, but you're talking about Noah's Ark was right here, okay? So all of the Japhethites were once in this region. This is why the Hittites, when they ruled this area, it was called the Hittite Empire, which the Hittites were Canaanites, so they're Hamites. The language is called Luwian because it's the Lydians. It's their forefathers called Lud. But if you look at Hittite words, they always have soft sounds in the middle of them. And so like the Achaeans, they'll call the Ahiwa, right? For whatever reason, they don't have hard sounds in the middle of their words. And so the Lydians, they're going to call Luwians, okay? So the language is called Luwia. But it's a Japhethite language, and the reason is because most of the surrounding region is Japhethite. So you have the Lydians, who are pretty much the nobility of the land when the Hittites take over, are going to be the backbone of what the culture is named after. The language itself is going to be a creole, which is basically a culture, a language that is more influenced by Japhethites than other languages. But a creole is just a mixed language, like a common language. Haitian is a creole, okay? Haitian is going to be a mix of English and French and African languages, okay? That's a creole, okay? And all this training on what a creole is, I started learning this stuff in high school. I was always interested in linguistics and etymology, so I started learning this in high school. In junior college, I was taking classes on anthropology where we were covering linguistics and etymology, and then I ended up getting my bachelor's degree in social studies for secondary education with a history as my primary emphasis. And so this is why I've got this background in learning and discerning between tongues and languages and nations and the table of nations. This is why I nerd out in this stuff. I've been into this now. I'm 46 years old. I've been into this since high school. That's when I started taking an interest in this stuff. And I've been interested in Bible prophecy since high school, even before I was a Christian. Okay, so you're talking 30 years of experience with this. Well, most of your pastors and most of your Bible teachers are not good historians. They don't mess around with etymology. They don't mess around with genetics and stuff like that. And I'm researching all these genetic stuffs, and I'm constantly looking at the new information and the better information to verify my presuppositions from the past as this information gets better. And I'm telling you, I'm looking at the haplogroups and the spread of the genetic information and where these people are, the linguistic evidence. I'm reading some of the top guys in comparative religion right now, which covers a ton of stuff having to do with where people disperse genetically, where people dispersed linguistically, and how these languages and stuff like that are present in the different religions, and that's where we get the names of these different gods and stuff like that, okay? So the layers of information I'm putting together to corroborate who these people groups are goes so much farther than your average Bible scholar, which will say things like, I think Gog is Turkey because there was this King Gyges, okay? This is an idea that somebody showed me was first presented by Matthew Poole in the 17th century. It really started to pick up steam in the 20th century and start getting put into Bible maps and stuff and commentaries like that when people started having commentaries with all their footnotes. But now you can get right on Wikipedia and find out that Gyges was not really his real name. His real name was Kukus. But Kukus is his Lydian name. Lydia, member, descends from Lud. And Kukus is actually transliterated by Greeks to Gyges. Okay? And so the Greeks call him Gyges, and then these histories are going to go into the Romans, and they're going to be picked up by Protestant reformers 1500, 2,000 years later. Okay? And they're going to say, oh, Gyges sounds like Gog. There's two G's in there. Gyges must be Gog, therefore Gog must be Turkey, because Lydia's in Turkey. Okay? Well, here's the problem. He dies in 644 BC. Do you know when Ezekiel's writing? Ezekiel starts his thing 11 years before the destruction of Jerusalem, which would be roughly 598 BC. So 50 years after King Gyges dies. He's not going to prophesy about a guy who's been dead for 50 years. Okay? So Gyges is out. Now, did they know this back in... No, they didn't know this. I didn't know this until I looked this up. Okay? This is how much better this information is, because people from all over the world are contributing. Look at all the linguists. Look at all the different alphabets that are being incorporated here. The research is getting so much better because people all over the world, academics from all over the world, are contributing to the body of knowledge on Wikipedia. This is why it's such a great source, and this is why your universities hate it. They hate Wikipedia, because as we're getting closer to this, we're finding out, well, the Bible's way more true than we thought, and the whole world knows it, okay? Your academics hate this. They want to be the cults that keep all the special knowledge, and they don't want you to believe that something that is put together by the people in general can contribute to, be where you get your best knowledge from. Well, the reality is we literally are like, here's the Luwian, remember that's the Hittite language. He would have been called Hua in that language. He's called Kuka, because remember, they don't have hard letters. They have soft letters. So they're called Hua. Lycian, Zuka. Latin would say Abus, and the word means grandfather. So Gyges means grandfather. And this guy is going to be part of a line of people who's ultimately going to marry in with, his descendants are going to marry in with the Persians. And the reason is because the Medes and the Lydians are both fighting Assyria in the generation of Isaiah. Okay? So in the generation before Ezekiel, this is Isaiah, this is roughly 100 to 150 years before Ezekiel, okay? This Gyges is going to be part of a kingdom that has a history of fighting the Assyrians, and then the Medes are going to also be enemies to the Assyrians, and they're going to team up with the Babylonians and ultimately overthrow the Assyrians. Then after that, the Lydians are going to marry in with the Medes to cement this alliance, and right after they do, it's literally Cyaxares and Astyages. It's that generation that they marry in, and then Cyrus of Persia, who is also married into that same family, is going to take over the whole empire, and he is ultimately going to take over Lydia as well. Okay, this is why he's so successful in taking over Babylon and Egypt and all this stuff so quickly, because most of those people were already allied with each other through marriage by the time he starts taking it over. And that's how you get Cyrus's great big Persian empire. Okay? So we know all this now because we've got all this great information. They didn't have this when Hal Lindsey wrote. They didn't have this when Chuck Missler wrote. Chuck Missler, I learned a lot from him, and I've learned that a lot of his information since then is bunk. Okay? I really respected him. I think he was a great teacher for his day. But the knowledge base of all of humanity has far left Chuck Missler behind, and we can debunk so many things that he said and come up with better ideas, okay? Now, this is what the Bible says it's going to be like in the last day in Daniel. He says people will go to and fro and knowledge will increase, okay? This is how they go to and fro. This is literally being contributed to from people from all over the world. And I'm able to pick this up and go, oh, that makes sense. Guy just is out. Okay? So who is Gog? Well, we're going to go through all the table of nations, but I'm going to walk you guys through my research methodology so you can understand how I figure these things out and not just listen to me. Because you're going to hear me say things in a video, and like this guy, for instance, pulled up this video that I probably made years ago, and it was reaction to people like Joel Richards saying Gog is Turkey, and he's also the Antichrist. Which he does this because he pulls a reference to Agag being called Gog in the Septuagint, in the Samaritan Pentateuch, and says, well, those are older, those are better, so therefore Gog is this prophecy about King Agag of the Amalekites, and it literally mentions the Amalekites in the prophecy, who's ultimately going to be killed by Samuel in a prophecy that says his king will be above Agag, okay? This is a prophecy about the kings of Israel, okay? Well, King Saul was literally standing over King Agag when Samuel finally killed him. Saul was supposed to kill him, but he didn't do it, and so Samuel did it, okay? He fulfilled the prophecy of the king of Israel being over King Agag, and they talk about how Amalekite was the first of the nations, and yet he's going to fall to the king of Israel, okay? Well, Joel Richardson is going to take that and be like, oh, here's a translation that says Agag is Gog, so therefore Gog is the Antichrist, and it's ultimately about Gog falling to Christ. Now, I'm not doubting that the translators of the Septuagint believe that, okay? But the translators of the Septuagint were mixing their scholarship with the Greeks, and the Greeks had a lot of misinformation in their scholarship. A lot of their scholarship was hearsay. A lot of their scholarship was transliterating languages, and Greeks are known for making mistakes and making stuff up and making up legendary characters and stuff like that as a way of justifying where a people group comes from. And we find out that the Jews learned that from them, and you'll find in a lot of apocryphal writings, they're making up the names of people and places and things to make sense of the world they know in their time. And you can find this in the Apocrypha, and I've covered a lot of these Apocrypha in my videos, how this stuff is stupid, it doesn't make sense, you can tell this is BS, and people are saying stuff that would make sense to a commoner in their day, but when we actually look at the history, we go in the book of Tobit, there's no way he just took a walk over the course of 2 days from Nineveh to Ecbatana, which are hundreds and hundreds of miles away, okay? But that's what it says in the book of Tobit. Well, this is bullcrap. It's a made-up legend. And you have these made-up Jewish legends all over the place. The Jews were not the best scholars. This is why the Jewish calendar is off by 200, it's like roughly 270 years it's off by, because they only accounted the Persian kings that were in the Bible, and they didn't know Persian history. And now that we know Persian history, we know that their calendar's way off, and the people who made that calendar, according to the Masoretic text, are off by like 250 years on what year it is. Okay? So they think it's like 5,700 from Adam. So, going back to my methodology, this is what I would do, is I would start with the Table of Nations, and these are going to be your main texts that you want to know for studying the Table of Nations, okay? Number 1 is going to be Genesis 10, okay? It's going to have all the Table of Nations and who they came from in terms of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You're going to have a truncated version of this in 1 Chronicles 1. Same exact nation, so I'm going to go from this because I just know this well enough to know who's who, okay? Second to that, especially when you're dealing with Ezekiel 38 and 39, you're going to want to know that in Ezekiel 27, 10 chapters before, he is going to have this word of the Lord that comes to the king of Tyre, okay? Well, this king of Tyre, it's going to literally list all of these nations who trade with Tyre, because Tyre is the trade capital of the world. It's like the New York or the Singapore or the Shanghai or the London of the world at their time, okay? And so it literally goes through and lists all the different nations, and you're going to find out that most of the nations from the Table of Nations are in here. So this is how you know what the world of Ezekiel looked like, because he's listing all these nations from the Table of Nations and where they're coming from to trade from Tyre. So we're going to walk through that, okay? And then we're going to get into Ezekiel 38, and so when he starts listing these nations, we can have a pretty good idea of who they are, okay? So God, in his providence, in his wisdom, made sure before you go into Ezekiel 38 and 39 and start trying to figure out who these ancient nations are, that you understand that they're all trading with Tyre, or a lot of them are trading with Tyre. And so you can have a pretty good idea of who's who and who's not as like a second witness to that. So after that, we go to just looking up these different nations, and we're going to look at place names in the world and look at some etymology on where these places are situated, so we can make some sense of, oh, there's where Rosh is. Rostov, the Kievan Rus in Rostov, that's Rosh, okay? Well, where did they come from? Well, it turns out that there was a kingdom of Urartu around the time of Ezekiel where there was a king Rusha there. And he's like Rusha the fifth. And then Urartu is going to fall to I believe, Persia after that. And this kingdom is going to disappear. Where did they go? Well, we don't know exactly because, people who tend to collapse don't have great historical records. But around 1,000 years later, we have these people popping up in Ukraine called the Kievan Rus. Okay? And these Rus plant cities like Rostov on the Don River, which is just north of the area of Armenia. Is that a shocker? Shouldn't be. If this guy was the last king of the kingdom of Urartu, which is in the territory where the sons of Gomer came from, which are Japheth, and then also Ashkenaz, which is where the Germans come from, and then also Togarmah, which is where the Turks come from. You're literally, Japheth becomes the name for the Riphean Mountains, which is all over ancient literature, and people have figured out it's the mountain that the Don and the Volga rivers flow from. Well, those are the main rivers of Russia. And the mountains they flow from is the Ural Mountains. So the Ural Mountains, they figured out, are the Riphean Mountains. And the rivers that flow from them flow basically between Moscow and Ukraine all the way down to the area of Armenia into the Black Sea. Okay? So we're going to find these people called the Tubal. We're going to find a river that flows all the way up into the Caspian Sea. And if you go way upriver, there's a people called Tobolsk. And the SK at the end, it usually denotes the sons of or the property of Tubal. Okay? The Georgian name for their capital is Tbilisi. And that's this Z at the end is basically where the people of Tubal are. Tbilisi, okay? And then Rostov is going to be that version of that. And you're going to find out that these were all different languages, but you're going to have like 5 different signifiers that represent the people of or the property of or the sons of this person. And you're going to have Ov, which is going to be, it seems to be the Muscovite version, or I'm sorry, it seems to be the Russian or Riphean version. You're going to have Va, which seems to be the Muscovite or Meshech version. So Mesekva, Moskva is Moscow. Okay, you're going to have the different language groups calling it Moskva or Moskov, which Moscow, that's where Moskov comes from. So it's literally the Russian or Riphean version of Moskva, which is 2 different language groups, the Ripheans and the Meshech. Okay, you're going to have SK at the end if it seems to be from Tubal. That seems to be what it is. And then you're going to have, there's another one. Oh, like Iski is something where it seems to be more like the Turkish version. So when you look at a map of Russia, you're going to see these places going all the way out to the east, and they're going to have different name endings at the ends of their cities. Well, that's because they're once upon a time different people groups. And then you're going to see these random people within the end of their city is just Berg. Well, Berg just means it's the dwelling place. It's a Germanic word. Well, because some German peoples migrated over there, and Ashkenaz didn't just go to Germany. They went to other places as well. And so Berg is basically the dwelling place of whoever these people are, okay? So we're gonna go through all these things, then we're gonna take you to Ezekiel 38 to show you I'm not just going from Ezekiel 38, looking up something online and trying to figure out who these cities are. I'm starting with the Table of Nations. And then I'm going to Ezekiel 27, and then I'm going through ancient history and having a good idea of where all the people groups came from. And then I'm approaching Ezekiel 38 to say, now who are these people, okay? So we're going to start in the Table of Nations, Genesis 10 real quick, and I'm just going to show you off the top of my head. Remember, I have been studying this since I was in college, so roughly 24 years old I think I was when I was in college. So we're talking 22 years ago I started doing this, okay? So we've got the sons of Japheth. Gomer is going to start out around Ararat. So the kingdom of Urartu is going to be based on them. The Cimmerians are going to come from them. Their name is preserved in Germany, okay? Because the Romans are going to call the Germans, remember, they're going to switch the M and the R on Gormans, Germans, even though they're Ashkenazis who are a son of Gomer, okay? Magog is where the Mongolians come from. Madai is where the Medes come from. Javan is where the Ionians come from. So think Ionia is going to be western Turkey and the western seacoast of Turkey. So it's going to be the region where it's eventually going to be settled by the Trojans, which are a Thracian people, and the Danites are going to be there, okay? So Dardana, you'll hear me talk about Dardana, and Ilios is what the Hittites called Troy, Ilios, okay? Tubal is going to be originally where the Georgians are in Tbilisi, and it's also going to migrate up to Tobolsk, and they're going to have a city up there, but they're going to be, what's going to end up happening, and this is something that I learned in my undergrad from this guy who was all about the whole horse lords of Asia. When these horse lords come down, you're going to have other peoples going out, and these people who go out are roughnecks, and so they're going to ride horses, they're going to hunt, they're going to travel across broad swaths of land, and in a lot of cases, they're just going to go kidnap their wives. They're going to go into towns and cities and stuff and burn and pillage and kidnap the good-looking women and say, these are our wives. And they're going to populate all over, and they're going to look very different because their wives are from all over the place. This is how you get Celts. Celts are literally related to the Mongols, and they know that the language of the Celtic language is closer to Chinese than it is to any Germanic language, okay? The reason is because the Celts are a tribe of Mongols that go over here to the region of around Czechoslovakia, and then they kidnap Thracian people, which are blonde and blue-eyed, and then they have kids with them, and those kids come out red-haired and blue-eyed. And these people end up becoming the Gaelic peoples, the Celtic peoples. The Scotoi come from the Gaelic people, so they're a derivative of the Irish that go up and become the Scottish people. They're also some of them are going to come down here in the region before the Roman Empire, and they're going to become the Gauls. So the Galatians that Paul is writing to are actually Celts, okay? So you have this stuff happen, and these people spread all over the place, and they mix with different people, and they're going to look very different at the end of it. But in their language, you're going to have the derivative clues for where they came from, and also in their genetics, okay? This is why linguistics and genetics is so important in understanding history. So Gomer's going to be these Cimmerians right here, and of course they probably start out around here in Gamir, and then they get their horses and they start roving around this territory, but then they eventually come and invade back. It seems to be that some of their descendants, whether they're of Gomer, like later descendants of Gomer or Japheth, become the kings of Urartu, who are Russia. Okay. After them, we're going to go next to Tubal, Tbilisi, Meshech. I just told you that is Moskva, and then Tyrus is where the Thracians come from, the Trojans come from, and then the cities of Tiryns and Tyre. Okay. Shouldn't be that hard to work this out, okay? Tyrus is Thracians, and it's just a th instead of a t. Thracians, okay, becomes the Thracians. And the Thracians are the more redneck of them, if you will, while the Trojans are basically the elite of them. So the Trojans are going to be a protectorate of the Hittite Empire, and the main trade city between them and the Thracians, and also the Greeks on the other side of the Aegean Sea. And so because of that, the people of Troy become more sophisticated, more educated. They're going to actually be a capital of the bronze trade between, you're going to get tin from England, and it's going to go to Troy, and it's going to go to the Hittite Empire for them to make bronze, because they're going to have the copper mines from Cyprus, and they're going to also have the copper mines throughout Turkey, but the tin needs to come from somewhere, and it's either going to come from Afghanistan or England for the most part. There are other tin mines, but those are the biggest sources in the ancient world, okay? So because all that tin goes through Troy's going to become very rich. And they're going to be central to the power of the Hittite Empire because you need bronze to make your weapons, you need tin to make bronze, you need weapons to rule people. Okay, and so what ends up happening is when Troy falls, the Hittite Empire actually falls before Troy falls, but Troy's going to fall several times. The Danites take over basically Troy. They seem to marry in with them, and King Priam, who is the king of Troy when you have the whole Achilles and the Trojan War and all that stuff, comes from Dardana, which is going to be a Danite colony, and they're basically going to it's going to halt the flow of bronze to the Hittite Empire, which the Danites, they're a Canaanite people, and the Danites are all about killing the Canaanites. And so the Japhethites around them, it's not just the Danites, but they're probably involved with it, but they're probably more involved in disrupting their supply chain. These other Japhethite peoples are eventually going to overthrow the Hittite kingdoms, and you're going to have some smaller Hittite kingdoms, and then you're going to have some, not really a kingdom that arises, but eventually you're going to have this kingdom of Lydia arise in its place, okay? So you have Gomer that has these 4 sons. Remember, these are the sons of Japheth, and then the sons of Gomer is going to be Ashkenaz, which is going to be where the Germans come from. That's why the Ashkenazi Jews are called, they're the Jews of the Germanics, okay? And they understand that, and so that's why they call themselves Ashkenazi Jews, because they're Jews who are married in with the Germans. This starts in the days of Charlemagne. Riphath, the Riphean mountains are going to be named for them. I told you that's the Earls, and so Rush seems to be a descendant of them, either that or a descendant of Gomer, who becomes a noble among them, and that's where the Kiev and Rus come from. We don't know this for certain. We're just following names and stuff like that. Togarma is going to become the Turkmen, and they're, for the most part, are going to move over to the Stan countries. So you want to think the other side of the Caspian Sea, basically between the Caspian Sea and the Himalayas. And they're even going to be up in the Gobi Desert, and the Uyghurs of China are going to be in there. And there's actually you did have the Khazar Kingdom, which is going to be, I believe, in Crimea, convert to Judaism. And Jewish scribes are going to show him that they're descended from Togarma, and that there were 10 tribes that came from Togarma that they've kept track of. And this is some Jewish scholars are going to have information that they're going to get from the Persians and the Babylonians and stuff like this. And so they have these tribes of Togarma that are, he basically says there are 10 of them, and they account the Khazars as one of them. They also account the Uyghurs as one of them, which are the people in the Xinjiang province of China that are being put into camps and stuff like that by the Chinese right now. That's happening because they're Turkish peoples, not related to the Chinese. The Chinese are a combination of Mongoloid people and Sinite people, primarily. Okay, that's who the Han Chinese are. Okay, and I believe that the term Han and the term Hun are related. Because there's a Hun River up in North Korea, and it seems to be that the Mongols in the north basically took over China, but were very much married in with the Chinese people, so they look Chinese. That's why the Mongols have the monolid eye that actually comes from Chinese descent. You can trace that all the way over to Canaan. You can have people in Egypt that look that way, okay, because they're Canaanites. The sons of Javan. Javan is going to be transliterate to Ionia. It's going to be a weird transliteration, but I would expect that is something that comes from the Hittites, because the Hittites don't have hard sounds in the middles of their letters. So Ionians becomes Javan. Alicia is actually going to be Cyprus. They're going to be up near Javan also, but they're going to have the island of Cyprus. It's called Elisha. During the time of the Egyptians all the way into the Assyrians and Greeks and Persians. Okay, Tarshish is going to be in Spain and England. They're going to have the tin mines at Cornwall. They're also going to have Port City in Spain that Jonah goes to, or tries to go to. Okay, Kittim seems to be southern Italy where these guys are, but they also are going to be on the island of Cyprus. That seems to be where they are. But there's prophecies about the Kittim coming from the west that is about the Roman Empire coming in the days of Balaam in the book of Numbers. The Dodanim, some people think that the Rhodes comes from them because there's an island of Rhodes. I don't think that is accurate. There's actually a city called Dodana in the realm of the Dorian Greeks. So the Dorian Greeks would basically be the Greeks that were from more like Albania and the areas north of what we consider Greece today. So there's, these 5 tribes, and when the Danites and the Tyrans largely start to dominate the Greeks on Peloponnese and Crete, these seem to be the Greeks that are going to come in later and they seem to come in with sons of Hercules, which might be descendants of Samson, and take back over. It's famously known as the Dorian invasion, but their capital city is called Dodona. Okay. So it says, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided into their lands, everyone after his tongue, their families and nations. So this term isles can mean it can mean habitable spot, coasts. So the word can mean isles or coast, but the word coast often refers to the border of a region. That's not necessarily an island or a seacoast. Okay. So you have to look at some context for those words, okay? So those are the Japhethites, and most of the people involved in the Gog-Magog invasion are going to be Japhethites. The people that aren't involved are going to be these Greek cities. Ashkenaz is not involved. Riphath seems to be involved through Rosh. And again, this King Rusha is right in the days of Ezekiel, so that's why I think it's that guy that he's talking about, okay? So you have Gomer's going to be involved, Magog's going to be involved, Madai is not going to be involved, the Medes are not, Javan's not going to be involved, Tubal's going to be involved, Meshech is going to be involved, and Tyrus is not going to be involved. So the Thracians is basically where it seems like where most of your blonde-haired, blue-eyed people come from in Europe. It's not the Germans, it's the Norse, which seem to be a mixture of, like the Danish seem to be Danites mixed with Thracians. But the Norse and Danish seem to be that blonde hair, blue eye does not come from the Danites. It comes from the Thracians. And then, like I said, when they mix with Mongoloid peoples, it's going to turn to red hair, blue eyed people. And that's why you're going to have red hair, blue eyed people and blonde hair, blue eyed people all over Europe. The Thracians seem to be the main core people where that comes from, and they also seem to be the first inhabitants of Northern Europe. Everybody else seems to be south along the coast of the Mediterranean, and the Thracians seem to be first in Europe. So, Ham, we have Cush. So we've been talking a lot about Ham in my Serpent by the Way research. Cush is going to be basically Sudan and Ethiopia. Mizraim is going to be Egypt. Phut is going to be, it's actually the side of the Red Sea. It was called Punt by the Egyptians, and that's going to be what's now today Eritrea and Somalia. And that is being contended over by Turkish and UAE interests. Turkey's trying to reestablish the Ottoman Empire, and they had ports there. Okay, Cush is going to have a son named Seba, who's going to become the Sabaeans. Havilah is going to become, I believe he's going to be in Arabia. Sabta, I believe, is also in Arabia, but I'm not exactly sure where he is, or Sabteka. But Rama and Sheba seems to be in the region east of Ethiopia and Nubia. Dedan seems to be there as well, but Rama and Shiva seem to go to India and East India, particularly. You're going to find the Ramayana, which is in East India, and then there's going to be Shiva. These are the gods Rama and Shiva of India. Okay, they're going to go there with Ham and Cush later on. They're all going to be in India. But remember, these guys are going to live to be like 400 years old. So they could go to one place, populate a bunch of descendants over there for like 100, 200 years, and then they go to this other place and populate a bunch more. So then we've got Nimrod is going to come from Cush. We've talked about that over and over. And then we've got, go down to Mizraim, we have the Ludim. So there's going to be a Lud that is a descendant of Shem, and then there's also going to be a Ludim that come from Egypt. So you're going to see two Luds in Ezekiel 27. One is going to be the ones who probably are in the region of Egypt and Cyrene, so in the area around Libya. And then the Anamim, the Lahabim, I have a feeling Libya comes from Lahabim. The Greeks call it Libya. Naphtuhim, but these are basically the Pathurim, the Chalsohims, out of whom came the Philistines and the Caphtorim. The Caphtorim we know are in Crete, but they're also in Keft. Near the region of Thebes, these are the ones who seem to co-rule with the Israelites. The Philistines come out of the Chalsoim, so that's another tribe of Egypt. We don't really know where most of these tribes are situated, and the reason is because when Joseph becomes the prime minister of Egypt, this is right after the Tower of Babel, and all these people's languages get mixed up. It talks about how he disperses them to the four corners of Egypt. So basically, they all sell their lands to Pharaoh, and they all basically become peasants in their land. And the main ruling people seem to be the Caphtorim and the Hebrews, which they call the Hyksos. And all the rest of these guys are basically peasants, with the exception of the priesthood. They're peasants scattered throughout the land. And so they eventually are all going to speak the language of the Captarim, which is why the Egyptians who don't speak Arabic speak what is called Coptic. Okay? So this all makes a lot of sense when you understand that Kift is right near Thebes, and that's where the Hebrews live. That's where the Abydos is right near there, and I've talked extensively about that. Okay? So Canaan is going to produce Sidon. This is where going to be the Sidonians, where the Phoenicians come from them, and they're going to found Carthage. Heth is going to be where the Hittites come from. The Jebusites are going to be around Jerusalem. The Amorites are going to be in northern Canaan all the way over. They're going to actually conquer and form the Babylonian Empire. The Girgashites are going to be the Girgasines, which you're going to hear about them in the time of Christ. This is where the guy with the legion comes from. The Hivites are going to be in the Jordan Valley and also related to the people who Esau marries into on Mount Seir. The Archites, there's going to be a city called Acre, which is a Crusader city, which is going to be on the coast of Phoenicia. The Sinites are going to become the Chinese, but they're going to start out in the wilderness of Sin in Mount Sinai. This is why Mount Sinai has multiple names. Its other name, I forget, Mount Horeb literally just means mountain of the wilderness. Har means mountain, and Eb means desert or wilderness or emptiness. So the mountain of the wilderness is Horeb, but it's also called Mount Sinai because that's where the Sinites originally were. The Arvadite, we're going to see these people associated with Tyre. They're involved with making ships and sailing. The Zemarites are going to become the Cimmerians. The Hamathites are going to have a city called Hamath, which is in Syria. And they're basically the northern part between the Euphrates River and the Mediterranean coast are going to be the Hamathites. These Canaanites are going to spread all over. This talks about this is where they originally were, but they spread all over after that. Okay, so they spread throughout the world, but these are their core territories in the beginning. That becomes the Promised Land. Then we're going to get to the Shemites. The Shemites are going to be the children of Eber, are going to be Hebron. This is where Heber seems to first dwell, which makes sense. He's the great-grandson of Shem, and he seems to be the shepherd herdsman who is in charge of the sheep for the offerings, because when Melchizedek is set up by Noah as the king of righteousness and the high priest of the world, he is basically meant to, they're meant to bring up offerings just like they did in the days of Solomon, just like they're going to do in the millennium. They bring up offerings to the one true God, and then they're going to ask God to inquire to intermediate any disputes they have between their nations and stuff like that. That was the plan that Noah had, but which was how the world was ruled from Adam on down through Noah. But God is, the Hamites and the Canaanites are going to disrupt that, and it's not ultimately going to come to fulfillment because Noah prophesies about this. It's going to come to fulfillment with Christ ruling in the millennium. This is why this is important. Noah prophesies that the Japhethites are going to dwell in the tents of Shem, which essentially means under the religious covering of Shem, and they're going to be the priests over them. Okay, and that doesn't get fulfilled ultimately until the millennium. So Asher becomes the Assyrians. Arphaxad is going to become the Chaldeans. Are going to come from him. These people, mostly their lands get overtaken by the Semites, they get overtaken by the people of Cush and the people of the Sinites and then the Zemarites, which are the Cimmerians. So they're all mixed in with these people, but it's out of him. He's going to be a father of Heber eventually, and Abraham and all of them are going to come from him. Okay, that's why they come out of Ur of the Chaldees. Well, the people group that come from them, they believe that there's a guy named Kesed or Kelad or whatever that came generations after him, and that's where the Chaldees get their name, but he's descended from them. So that's the main people group descended from them. Lud is where the Lydians come from, and they're going to start out to the west of their brothers, probably in the Cilician region, and then as the Hittites conquer Anatolia, which is western Turkey, they seem to either push the Lydians further and further and further west, or take the Lydians with them as a nobility class, which is probably a little of both, depending on, again, we don't have the historical records, but that's typically what goes down, is you're going to have some people are going to marry in with them or subordinate to them, and others that are just going to be pushed to the east. And the Lydians to the east of them are going to become a league of cities that they never fully conquer. And then after the Hittites fall, those Lydians are going to come back and have a pretty strong Lydian kingdom. in the generations before Ezekiel. Okay. The children of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. The Arameans are going to mostly be between. I mean, it's basically Syria. So they're going to be between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and also east of the Euphrates River down through Damascus. Okay, so that they would call that Soel Syria, or the Gap of Syria. It's basically the gap between the Assyrian Empire and the Mediterranean coast is where they would be. Arphaxad, so now this is the generations that come down to Noah. Arphaxad begot Salah. We don't know of a people descended from Salah, but Eber, that's where the Haparu or Hebrew people come from, where Abraham's descended from. And then Eber's going to have two sons. One is named Peleg, that Abraham comes from. The other is Joktan, and Joktan begins these 13 sons, and the youngest of them is Jobab, who is Job. Okay, so I've worked out the math on this. It all works out. Job is going to die around 250 years old. He's going to be the youngest guy in the Table of Nations, and these people are going to mostly settle from the Mount Safar. They talk about this. So unto Safar, a mount of the east. There's a Mount Safar in Yemen, all the way up the coast of Arabia, up to Edom. And Jobab is going to be basically a big shepherd sheik like Abraham. And he seems to go between the area around Damascus, which is where the Arameans are, and the area around Edom. And he's ultimately going to be, his second wife is going to be a great-granddaughter of Esau. This is where he has his 10 kids after his first 10 kids die. And then Elihu, who is the guy who speaks right before Yahweh speaks in Job, he's going to be a descendant of Buz. And Buz is going to be a descendant of Abraham's brother Nahor. And Abraham's brother Nahor, their people become known as the Aram Naharim to the Hebrews. They think that means Aram between the rivers. That's what scholars think. But Nahor is also the word for river. And so it's Aram Naharim. It's the Arameans mixed with Nahor's people. And the Egyptians are going to call them Matani Naharim. And Matani has to do with a union of marriage alliances, because that's where the Israelites who lived among them got their people from. And of those people, Elihu is going to be a Buzite who is going to marry Ram and become part of the line of David. Or I'm sorry. He is like an uncle to somebody who marries into the line of David. That's who he is, and he's the one who's going to carry the story of Job to the line of David. That's why they're going to have the story of Job in with the wisdom literature. So this is what I have so far. And again, I haven't always known this stuff. I'm constantly learning and refining how I'm learning this stuff and how I'm validating this stuff. But I don't know anybody who knows this stuff better than me. And of course, there's stuff that I could be wrong on. There's stuff that I'm theorizing and speculating on. But based on how I research and based on how I understand historiography, linguistics, genetics, etymology, comparative religions, and just history, I don't know of anyone in biblical scholarship that has better methodology than I do for these things. Okay, I don't know anybody who has more robust methodology. If I knew of that person, I would be reading that person and studying this stuff for myself. But I've read as many of those people as I can find, and what I find when I read the commentaries, somebody had mentioned to me, for instance, Matthew Poole. I've got Matthew Poole's commentary right here. I've read these commentaries, and I'm not impressed with the information in them. And again, a lot of these commentaries were written centuries ago by people who did not have access to 10% of the information I do. They may have had access to some really old books, but I have access to those old books, plus tons and tons and tons of other information and scholarship that has come since then, okay? I mean, you're talking about in the 16, 17, 1800s, academia is really just getting started in the West. You have a lot of weird theories that are coming out because people are just starting to tease out, rationalistic ideas for the first time coming out of a pretty superstitious Roman Catholicism. Remember, it wasn't that long before that somebody's getting called a heretic for saying, the sun revolves around the earth revolves around the sun. Okay? So, moral of the story is, I respect these guys. I have tried to learn from these guys as much as I can, but I have reached a point where I'm better off with Wikipedia than I am with these old commentaries because the information has gotten that much better, okay? And I haven't just been glued to Wikipedia for the past 10 years. I've just gotten to a point where all these other sources that I've been looking at over these years and all these other scholars I've been listening to over these years are now inferior to Wikipedia in terms of the access to the information I can have right at my fingertips. Because the best of information is getting absorbed into Wikipedia by academics and scholars and article writers who are just putting all this information together. Okay, so it's not that these guys haven't contributed to what's on Wikipedia. It's because Wikipedia is getting their information and other people's information and putting it together to find better information. And this is great. This is people going to and fro and knowledge increasing. So it shouldn't be shocking that as we get closer to the end, we're going to have better information about how to interpret the Bible, and especially with these ancient nations and stuff like that, than the guys who wrote about it in the 16th century, the 17th century, and even the 20th century. They didn't have the internet. Okay? So that being said, we're going to go over now to Ezekiel 27. And this is so important because if you're going to make assertions about what Ezekiel is talking about with this nation and that nation in Ezekiel 38, you're going to need to know as a baseline. You are very ignorant if you don't know this, that in Ezekiel 27, he lists many of the nations that are in the Ezekiel 38 prophecy as trading partners with Tyre. So we want to go through this prophecy very carefully. So he says, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Now, thou son of man, take up a lamentation for Tyre, and say, O Tyrus, thou art thy that situate in the entry of the sea, which are a merchant for the people of many isles, says the Lord. O Tyrus, thou have said, I am perfect in beauty. So they're going to associate with Tyrus, with the vanity of Tyrus, with the vanity of Lucifer himself, and other prophecies in Isaiah and Ezekiel. In Isaiah, he condemns Tyrus to being burned, but it doesn't happen in the days of Isaiah with Assyria. They ultimately submit, and then it's not going to happen in the days of Nebuchadnezzar because they're going to submit to him. It's going to happen in the days of Alexander the Great where they finally go down. But this is consistent with how God prophesies to people, is that if you submit to this person I'm sending to destroy you, then I'll delay your judgment. And them turning from God in rebellion is them turning from that overlord that God has put over them. Okay, the overlord is put over them to discipline them from their pride and their idolatry. So anyways, it says, Thy borders are in the midst of the sea, thy borders are perfect in beauty. They have made the shipboards of the fir trees of Senir. I don't know where these are. They have taken cedars from Lebanon to make masts for thee. The oaks of Bashan have been thine oars. The company of the Asherites have made the benches of ivory and brought out of the isles of the Chittim. So the Chittim, this is Kittim. This is probably the islands of the people. It could be around Cyprus, but between Cyprus and southern Italy. Okay, these guys apparently had ivory. Well, why? Well, Crete had elephants there. These people also probably went into Africa and bought ivory from these African merchants that would have come from the tusks of elephants and rhinoceroses and stuff like that. And so they actually have benches in their ships made of ivory that are made by the Asherites, which is interesting. So these are Assyrians, okay? Remember, Assyria has gone down at this point. The Asherites still exist, but Nineveh and the Assyrian Empire is no longer a thing, okay? Fine linen with broidery work from Egypt that spread in the blue in their sail. From the isles of blue and purple, from the isles of Elisha was that which covered thee. Remember, we said the isles of Elisha is going to be Cyprus and probably some other isles in the Aegeans. But these guys would have been known for the people that make these blue and purple silks. The purple they're getting from Phoenicia. That's where the term Phoenicia comes from. It has to do with the purple dye that comes out of there. The inhabitants of Zidon and Arvad were their mariners. So remember, these are two. Sidon and Arvad were two Canaanite sons. And he says, Thy wise men, O Tyrus, that were in thee were thy pilots. So thy wise men, O Tyrus, these are people who are related to Troy and the Trojans. So remember, they're going to be sailing before these. But the mariners, the actual guys who are actually running the ships, are going to be Sidonians and Arvadites. The ancients of Gebal and the wise men thereof are thy caulkers. So these are people who are involved with shipbuilding, and caulking seems to be the sealing of the ships. All the ships with their mariners were in thee to occupy thy merchandise. So Gebal is a city. I don't know who these people are, but the city, it seems to be in Lebanon. They of Persia and Lud and Phut. Okay, now there's going to be two Luds mentioned here. This is going to be the Lud that is probably the Egyptian tribe, because Phut is going to be called Punt, and there's going to be Puntites south of Egypt and Putites west of Egypt. So I expect this Lud to be there, or it could be south of Egypt. Okay. Persia, this is very interesting. The Persians are going to have a port city in Yemen. So these merchants of Tyrus are actually going to sail. Let's pull up a Google map here. So in the days of Solomon, it talks about these merchants, that Solomon has people who sail with the merchants of Tyre. And what they do, Solomon is going to have ports down here. You see the Israelites have a port city called Elat, and on the Jordanian side that's called Aqaba. But Solomon's going to have a port city down here. And then he's also going to have ships that sail out of Haifa. To lesser degree, you're going to have, if you see where Tel Aviv is, you're going to have a place called Jaffa in Tel Aviv. I actually visited this when I went to Israel, which is going to be Joppa. That's where the Danites come from. Haifa is going to be, I think, where the Asherites are. And then you're going to have Tyre, which is up here in Lebanon. Okay, so Sidon, you see there's the Sidonians, and Tyre. And these cities are going to produce, these are the people who ship the wood back and forth from here to Joppa for Solomon's temple. Well, they're going to make ships together, it says, and they're going to go on a 3-year journey and come back. And where they seem to go, based on all the merchandise they're carrying, it's going to be like apes and peacocks and all kinds of gold and stuff like that. Well, they seem to go all the way over here to Tarshish, which is going to be, you see Tarragona, I think it's right around here in that. I don't know if that's derivative of Tarshish or not, or Tarasa. There you go. So this is the region of Tarshish that they go to. Remember, these people of Tarshish probably had people that went right across here, and then they went up into England and got tin. Okay, so that's going to be one of the original tin routes, along with the one to Afghanistan. And then they're going to go all the way around here, along the way, picking up things like apes and ivory. And they're going to go all the way around here. Remember, you have the Ivory Coast here, so that's probably going to be a major place where people are selling ivory. And then probably apes, because you're going to have apes coming out of the Congo and stuff. And apparently it would be pretty cool to have some apes in your castle, if you're a king. You're going to go all the way around here, and you're going to go to India and get peacocks. This is where peacocks come from, okay? So literally, these guys are going all the way into southern India. They're probably going to this place called Goa. That was a very old trading center. Spices and stuff are going to come from Kerala. Well, they're going to go back up here, and they're going to go along these coasts. They're going to get the gold of Ophir from here, Solomon gets. They're going to, Nubia is going to have gold, but the gold of Ophir seems to be like Oman or Yemen. And then they're going to go into India, and they get peacocks and spices and stuff, and then they're going to come back along here. Well, they're going to sail across Persia, which is right here, okay? The Parsis tribe, which is going to eventually take over all of the Persian Empire, they're situated down around here, I believe. It's either right here or right here, okay? So what they end up with is mercenaries in the army of Tyre, because they're doing this route every 3 years. And so they're probably picking up mercenaries who are going to be soldiers on their ships, just in case pirates try to get them. And then they're eventually going to accumulate armies of these mercenaries here. And so they're going to have these armies that are going to go on these routes with them, and they're going to be paid well, and they're going to live in Tyre, and they're just going to keep sailing with them. And so they've been at this since before the days of Solomon and King David, okay? These people, remember, are probably related to the Trojans and the Tyrians and the Thracians up here, and so they're probably going to be starting out trading with these guys up here. And then Tarshish, it seems like they hook up with the Danites to pin down where the tin mines are coming from, because those routes seem to be controlled by the Danites and the Egyptians when the Hebrews are friendly with Egypt. When the Danites come out of Egypt, they beeline for the cities that they establish with the Egyptians, partner up with the people of Tyre, and they wipe out all of Tyre's competition over here among these cities like Ugarit and these different Canaanite cities that are competitive with Tyre. And Tyre becomes that master port city for the Middle East because of the Danites wiping out all their competition around them. Then the Danites are going to take away all the way over here to Adana. They're going to have a shipyard called Adana, and then they're going to create the Sea Peoples, which are basically going to be these raiding, pillaging pirates that seem to be the result of the Danite wars to conquer all the tin routes. But ultimately, it's going to end up with the Minoan, they call it the Minoan situation. I believe the Minoan civilization is based on Samson's dad, Manoah. And then the Peloponnesian civilization is going to be called the Achaean League, and that is going to turn the Minoan civilization into the Mycenaean civilization. And it's the Mycenaean civilization in which the Danites seem to be allied with Troy, and that's kind of the new world order of the Mediterranean, if you will. This is basically all going to take place during the book of Judges, okay? But the point is they go on these big, from that time, the people of Tyre are going on these big sea routes. So you're talking a period at the time of Ezekiel of like 800-900 years of doing this. So by 800-900 years of doing this, they've probably picked up from these various lands. And again, these were people who probably had relatives in a lot of the mainlands that they're trading with in their loop around. So Solomon does this, just so you understand how profitable this is. This is in the book of Kings. Solomon does this route and in 1 year makes 666 talents of gold, which is over $1 billion worth of gold in our day. Okay? So it's a 3-year journey that's going to yield him in 1 year $666 of gold. And this is essentially a route. These armies represent a route all the way around Africa and into India and around Persia. Okay? So this is the men of Arvad were in their army and their walls round about. So these are the people who are domestic to the land. I don't know who the Gammadims are, but it says they're in their towers and hang their shields upon their walls round about. Tarshish was thy merchant by reasons of the multitude of all their riches. So the people of Tarshish across the way, these are another sons of the Greeks. And it says, with silver, iron, tin, and lead, they traded in their fairs. The only place where all these are in abundance is in England. So that's where they're getting it from. So they're probably getting this stuff from England and Spain, and then they're trading all the way over to Tyre. Then you have Javan, Tubal, and Meshech. So Tubal and Meshech are going to be two of the people in the Ezekiel 38 invasion. Okay? So Tubal is going to be Georgia. Meshech is going to be the Muscovites, but the Muscovites are going to be up and down the Don River. Okay? And Javan is going to be where they pass by. And Javan is going to be mentioned with the Danites as well, to get to where they are. It says they trade persons of men, so slaves, and vessels of brass. So brass is similar to bronze. It's made of a different metal mixed with tin. And they're probably producing it there based on the remnants of the copper mines and stuff like that that the Hittites were using. And then these people of Tubal and Meshech are probably trading slaves, because they might be getting, Tubal might be getting tin from Afghanistan and contributing to that bronze trade, but more than likely they're trading slaves. They have the house of Togarmah, these are the Turkmen, traded in thy fairs with horses and horsemen and mules, okay? So horses and horsemen, so the riders of horses, okay, and mules, okay? So these guys are probably getting horses that are bred in Central Asia, and I want to show you that route. So why are you putting Javan together? So Javan is going to be over here. Tubal is right there. There's Tbilisi. So they're going to probably be in between here. And then Meshech is going to be up and down this. This is, I believe, the Volga River. So you see Volgograd. Oh, Grad is another name at the end of cities. You see Rostov-on-Don right here. That is of the Rost. The Rosh. On the Don River. So this Don River is going to go up here towards these mountains, the Urals, which are going to be, I believe, to the east of Moscow, or the north of Moscow, right around here, I think. And it's going to produce Moscow. So these people might not have established Moscow, the city of Moscow yet, or they may have. We don't know. We don't have history that goes back that far. But the point is they're going to be up and down this river route. That's going to be where their civilization is. And then these guys are going to be coming from over here. And Togarmah is going to be coming from over here. And there might be some, because the Azerbaijanis are related to Turkmen. They may have been there in ancient times, or just like the Cimmerians would leave and then come back and invade. So they may have been here in ancient times, or they might have just been pushed there later on by Huns or Mongols or whatever. I don't know that history well enough. So you're going to have these people basically getting these horses from over here, and slaves from over here, and brass from over here, and that's the route that they're all going to get to Tyre over here. So they're going around the Black Sea to get to there, okay? So same thing with Tarshish. They're going across overland over here, but they're going to Tyre to get there. So let's look at what else Tyre has going on there. The men of Dedan were in thy merchants. Many isles were the merchandise of thy hand. They brought the presence of horns of ivory and ebony. Ebony and ivory is not just a great song about black people and white people getting along or about piano keys. These are actually stuff that's going to come from Africa. So Dedan, again, remember, isles can mean coastlands or the regions or the borders, okay? Many borders or many, it can mean basically countries, okay? But we know that the people of Nubia worshipped a god called Didun, which is based on Dedan, okay? So who were the people of Dudan here? I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm going to say it was probably somewhere between Nubia and Eritrea and Djibouti, this area right here. But the fact that they're pulling ebony and ivory, I believe ebony, I want to say it's a stone. Oh, it's a wood. So ebony wood is a super black wood, and I think they use it to make the black piano keys. But the ebony tree is in Africa and Asia, okay? So they're trading ebony and ivory. Well, where are they getting the ivory from? Elephants and rhinoceroses, probably. And the ebony is coming from the ebony trees, which are in Africa. So these are people who are from here, and they're either part of this circular route that's coming there, or they're going up to Aqaba. I don't think they're going up to Aqaba because after Solomon's kingdom starts to fall apart, it's no longer going to be a major trade port. So they're probably doing this big, long 3-year circular route that they're talking about in Solomon's day. So what we're seeing here, this 3-year route of Solomon's, is probably what most of this is coming from. Plus stuff, remember, if they're related to the Trojans, that would make sense why they're getting stuff from the Muscovites and Tubal and Javan, because that's all in the region of Troy. Okay, but Troy's going to fall. So who picks up that trade? Tyre does. Okay. Syria was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of the wares of thy making. They occupied thy fairs with emeralds, purple, broidered work, and fine linen, and the coral and they got. Remember, that purple stuff comes from Phoenicia, but apparently the Syrians are involved in trading that. So it seems like they are in their fairs or their markets, and they are basically merchants in their cities, okay? Judah and the land of Israel, they were your merchants. They traded in the market with Minnith and Penang and honey. I don't know what Minnith and Penang are, but honey and oil and balm. So they're probably getting these things from their allies in Arabia, but also making some of the stuff themselves. Damascus was thy merchant in their multitude and the wares of their making, and the multitude of their riches, the wine of Helbon and white wool. So these the people of the Arameans in Damascus are trading wool and wine with them. Dan also in Javan. So you see Javan mentioned twice. Well, why? Because there are the people of Javan that are in West Asia, and then there are the people of Javan that are in Achaia, or what we would call Greece today. Okay, so we have people of Javan on both sides of the Aegean Sea. These ones are very mixed in with Dan. And they're bringing iron, cassia, and calamus to their market. Then we have another Dedan, was thy merchant in precious clothes for chariots. Why? There's another Dedan. Okay, there's actually, I think, 3 Dedans. So if you look up Dedan, we know the other one is going to be the Dedan who's going to be Sheba and Dedan from Nubia. But we also have, so this is the one that's descended from Cush. We also have Jokshan, who is going to be, I believe is the descendant of Abraham through Keturah, and he has a sons named Sheba and Dedam. And it says the sons of Dedam were Asherim, Letushim, and Lehuhim. So I apologize. The Asherim that they mention here is not Assyria. They're called Asher. The Asherim are sons of Dedan. So these would be people in Arabia. So if we look at Genesis 25, you see the Midianites are right there with them. The sons of Dedan, we see Abraham's wife Keturah bears him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. A Shuite is going to be the friend of Job. Jokshan begets another, Sheba and Dedan. These are going to be Arabian tribes. And the sons of Dedan were the Asherim and Letuhim. So let's go back to the Asherim. I got the Asherim and the Asher. They just called the Assyrians Asher, okay? I got those two mixed up. So the Asherites, who make the benches of ivory, that actually makes a lot more sense because they're right on the other side of Africa versus the people of Assyria. They wouldn't be involved with elephants, I wouldn't think. So these guys might be craftsmen who are making stuff out of ivory, and they're making that. And then it says, but then it says brought out of the Isles of the Shittim. So maybe these are people of descendants of Abraham that migrated to Cyprus or something like that, and that could be possible because the Danites were there. So anyways, Dedan, the other merchant, is making precious clothes for chariots. So what is that? Are they lining these chariots with cloth for that? That could be that. Like the chariots are actually embroidered and upholstered and stuff like that, and that is coming from Dedan. That sounds about right. Well, chariots are coming from Egypt, and Dedan, and I would assume the Arabians have chariots too by this time, and they might be making special upholstered chariots with the cloth that's coming from there. Where are they getting the cloth from? Well, there's a lot of merchants of animals there, and these Arabians also trade as far away as Persia on camels and stuff like that. They could be getting silks or something similar like that. They could also be getting linen from Egypt, wherever they're making this upholstery with. So then we have Arabia and the princes of Kedar. Kedar is going to be a son of Ishmael, and he's going to be kind of right in the middle of Arabia between the Red Sea and Babylon, and this is going to be a kingdom for a while. We talk about this in Jeremiah. Babylon's going to subdue this kingdom, but they're basically trading in weapons. And then it says they're occupied with lambs, rams, and goats, because remember, you have a lot of shepherds that are in and herdsmen, the Bedouin in Arabia, and they're kind of that center capital of Arabia in their day. And then they're also going to be raiding other people's caravans. And so Nebuchadnezzar is going to conquer them and make sure they don't have any more metals to make their weapons with, basically, at that point. So again, this is during the days of Nebuchadnezzar. So this is right around this time that Ezekiel's writing. The merchants of Sheba and Ramah were all their merchants. So remember, there's multiple Shebas, but this is Sheba and Ramah in India. The merchants of Sheba and Ramah were thy merchants, occupied in chairs with the chief of all spices, with precious stones and gold. Okay? So they're going all the way. India is known, it's like the spice capital of the world. This is why if you go there, there's just curry and there's black pepper comes from India. I actually went to India, and this pastor's wife that went with me, she was showing me the pepper plants and how they make black pepper and stuff like that. So gold was also known to come from India. Alexander the Great said when they got there was just gold lying on the ground. That's how much gold was in India once upon a time. But they're mostly known for spices. Precious stones is also going to be there. There's the jade trade. So jade comes from Southeast Asia. And remember, the Ramayana and the Rama and Shiva are two Indian gods. And you're going to find these names, Rama, all over kingdoms in East India. You're going to find legends of Rama all over Southeast Asia, all the way down into Cambodia and Laos and stuff like that. And then Shiva is considered one of their top gods. Like Shiva is considered an incarnation or an avatar of Vishnu, which is one of their top gods, which I believe is, I'm doing research on that, but it seems like he's their version of Enoch or Horus or Enki or whatever. So, and then they're saying Shiva is an incarnation of him. Well, Shiva is actually a son of Cush. So this is Cush's youngest son and then his oldest son. Okay, so he's going to have some descendants in Nubia, which is going to be the kingdom of Sheba, who visits Solomon, but they're also going to have people in East India. So the Dravidian peoples, which are going to be your darker Indians, your Vedic Indians, so the Hindu language and Sanskrit is going to come from Aryans that invade from basically the region of Afghanistan and Bactria down to Pakistan, and then they're eventually going to take over northern India, and they're going to keep pushing these people to the south, and they're going to go south and southeast and form all kinds of kingdoms along the Himalayas, and then downriver from that down towards the Indian Ocean. And then these people are going to mix with people descended from the Chinese and probably other Canaanite tribes, and they're going to become the Polynesians, and the Taiwanese is going to be a main center where these people seem to disperse from to these different islands. But Taiwan seems to be originally settled by Canaanite people, which could be Sinites. It could also be, the Sinites seem to be different. They seem to have come mostly overland, but it could be Arvadites. It's kind of hard to tell. The Arvadites were known for sailing too. but they start in Taiwan and then they disperse throughout all the isles there, because that's probably how they just went in the coastlands, and then they get to Taiwan and they kind of consolidate their gene pool there, and then they're going to populate all these isles. But over the centuries, I mean, talking about 2,000 or 4,000 years to the present now, they're going to mix with the descendants of Shem and Rama, which are mostly going to be your Dravidian Indian peoples, and then they're also going to mix with peoples descended from the Chinese in Southeast Asia. So you're going to see these people come to merge in Indo-China, because Indo is just the generic word for river, but the original Indian people were the descendants of Shiva and Rama, and then the original Chinese were the descendants of Sine, and then those people are going to merge and mix in Southeast Asia, which is why it's called Indo-China. It's the merger of the Indians and the Chinese. Okay? So Haran is going to be where Abraham's relatives are. This is going to be right up in west of Assyria, between the Tigris and Euphrates River. Kana is probably Kalna that Nimrod established. Eden is actually going to be what they're calling, remember, the Cimmerians have not been there for quite some time. They've been gone for probably well over 1,000, I think close to 1,500 years. And then it says the merchants of Sheba. There's your third Sheba. We have 3 different Shebas here. Look at, we have Saba, and we have this Sheba of Cush. We have this Sheba of Jokshan. And then I believe we have a third Sheba that comes from, maybe I'm wrong. One of these might be Saba. There might be a Sheba that comes from Saba, or Seba. You say Seba, and then you have Sheba. So there might be 2 different Shebas, people later on. So this is the merchants of Sheba. Asher, that's Assyria. So these people of Sheba might be related to the Aramaeans, or they might be the Sabaeans. Haran, Kana, and Eden, these are all Mesopotamia. These are all between the Tigris and the Euphrates, as far as I can tell. And Kilmad probably is people, I would guess, might be related to the Chaldeans. I might be completely off, but all of these places, Haran, if that's Kelna, Eden is what they would have called Sumer. Gu Eden, remember, and then Sheba, and then Asher, that's Assyria. These are all between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. But it says they were thy merchants. These were thy merchants in all sorts of things, in blue clothes, embroidered work, and chests of rich apparel, bound with cords, made with cedar, among thy merchandise. The ships of Tarshish did sing in thee in thy market, and thou was replenished and made very glorious in the midst of the sea. Thy rowers brought into the great waters. The east wind had broken in the midst of the sea. Thy riches, thy fares, thy merchandise, thy mariners, thy pilots, thy caulkers, their occupiers of thy merchants, and all the men of war, and all in thee. And the company which is in the midst of thee shall fall in the midst of the seas in the day of ruin. Suburbs shall shake. So anyways, those are the people. It's all a prophecy about the judgment of Tyre, which is the biggest, richest trade city in all of the world at this time, okay? So it's such a great resource because it's not just telling you who these people are, it's telling you, based on the resources that they're bringing in, generally where they're coming from. So the main ones we want to focus on, we see Phut, which is near Lud. This is the Egyptian Ludim in Persia. These seem to be, again, in a circle around Africa. So all these, not Lud, but Put in Persia are both involved in the Ezekiel 38 invasion. We're also going to have Togarmah involved in Meshech and Tubal. So those are in the circular region around Turkey. So could you say that Togarmah is in Turkey? Well, they might have some peoples in Turkey, but that's not the main core of where they are. The main core of where they are is where the Turkmen are. Meshech, could you say they have some people in Turkey? I'm sure they do, because their ancestors are there, but that's not the main core of where they are. The main core of they are is up and down the Volga and Don rivers. Tubal, could you say they have some people in Turkey? I'm sure they do, but the main core of them are between the Black and the Caspian Seas, south of the Cimmerians, okay, or the Cimmerians. And they might have been north of that because they have cities all the way up to Tobolsk. and that's up a river that goes down into the Caspian Sea. So they might be around that Caspian Sea area and then eventually get pushed down by the Huns and the Mongols and stuff like that until they're kind of crunched between Turkey and Azerbaijan, or Turkey and Russia. That might be the case, but we know generally where these people are, and we know the stuff they traded, and all this stuff just makes sense, okay? So when we get to Ezekiel 38 now and we try to figure out where they are, we just want to look at the prophecy carefully, and understanding what we know about the table of nations before we even got there, we want to go and interpret this, okay? So this prophecy says, the word came to me saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog in the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophecy against them. So notice he's Gog, and you're going to see other he's not prophesying against Gog and the land of Magog. He's prophesying. Remember, the word of is not usually, there's ancient languages don't have a word of. So typically the word that's going to be a definite article, like the, is going to be it's going to be both a definite article and an of, essentially, depending on this. So it's really Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Now, some people will say it's chief prince. Well, why do they say that? Well, if you go to the Hebrew, you're going to see the Rosh, prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophecy against them. So we want to see the order that these words were in, because if it's chief prince, we should see something clearly denoting Rosh, prince. Oh, but in Hebrew, it's not necessarily that the adjective is afterwards. So we want to see so it doesn't look like this term is chief prince, because we have in Daniel we have Michael described as a chief prince, and they use a different term. It's Ha Rishonim, okay? That's Rosh, and then the Neem is prince, okay? So notice we have Neshi Rosh, Rishonim. See how they're different, and they're in a different order? So we see in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is going to use this term chief prince, but it's not chief prince, it's prince of Rosh. And so if we look in Ezekiel 38:3 and Ezekiel 39:1, we are going to see, thus says Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. 39:1 is going to say, behold, I am against you, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So based on what we have here, see, and again, your biblical scholars from the past couldn't just flip over to Daniel. Now let's see Michael, okay? Michael means great prince. Great prince. Now the word Rosh does mean head or chief, okay? We're not mistaking that. However, if you want to say chief prince, it's great prince. They have Gadol Sar. I don't know why that's good. Oh, because Daniel might be in Aramaic. 10:13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia just oh, here you go. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes. So this is Rishon. Rishon is how they would say chief prince, not Rosh. Okay? Not Rosh Nasir. Okay? So this is Daniel. He is contemporary with Ezekiel. He is mentioned twice in Ezekiel. No, I think 3 times in Ezekiel. They're both from Jerusalem. They're both part of the same deportation. They would use the same term for chief prince. Okay? So Daniel uses the term Rishon for chief prince in relation to Michael. So we can deduce from there that Ezekiel is not saying chief prince. He's saying prince of Rosh. Well, what your biblical scholars didn't know at this time is that at the very time that Ezekiel is prophesying, there's a kingdom of Urartu. Now, Urartu is going to be the kingdom of Ararat, which is going to be right around the region where the flood is. And so this is where Gomer and his sons are going to live around that area, okay? Now, the Gomerites, a lot of them are going to come out and become the Cimmerians. But remember, when you have people named after the father in the table of nations, this is typically what it is. if you go to Genesis 10 in the Table of Nations, if Gomer has these 3 sons listed, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah, why do they have people named Gomerites? And the answer is because these would be his firstborn sons, probably from his first wife. And the other Gomerites would have been sons from another wife. This is why they're called the Cimmerians, but they're not in the center. Well, who's in the center? Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. And we know the Togarmahs leave and become the Turkmen. We know the Ashkenazis leave and become the Germans, but not for a long time. They're not going to do this until the days of the Roman Empire. Okay? And we know the Riphath leaves and becomes, the Riphean Mountains are named after them. But when do they leave? Well, the answer probably is when the kingdom of Urartu falls. And so you have these people who are descended from them. Okay? The Ashkenazis and the Ripheans. Well, who's who? Well, we don't know. But what we do know is that in the days of Ezekiel, when you follow this down, this is Argishti, Sarduni, and then you get to 735. This is around the time of the Assyrian and Cimmerians. So the Cimmerians would have been their lesser brothers from another mother. Okay? And the Assyrians would have been just south of them. And this is in the heyday of their empire. There's a king, Rusha. Okay? R.J. Rushtuni, I looked this up. His name, Rushtuni, comes from this King Rusha, okay? And he is from Armenia. So there are Armenians who have people named Rusha and Rushtuni and stuff like that in their name, descended from these Rusha, okay? Well, the Russians have always historically held that Armenia is like their little brother. And it's not just because of the Eastern Orthodox Church being there. It's because their original people groups are descended from the Armenians. And so you see Rusha II, Rusha III, and by the time, remember, Ezekiel gets pulled out in 598 BC, and he's going to be writing between 598 BC and probably somewhere around 587 is when Jerusalem goes down, and it's probably within like 10 or 20 years after that he starts writing. So in the whole time that Ezekiel's writing, there is a king Rusha of the kingdom of Ararat. Okay, well, does that mean that Ararat or Gomer is Armenia? Could mean that. But what we also have is these people called the Rush. And this is the Principality of Moscow. This is going to be their territory, and they're going to marry in with the Mongolians and basically be the enforcers of their eastern territory or their western territories. Okay, it's going to be the Russians under the Mongolians who conquer all this land, Volgograd, Novgorod, Smolensk, and stuff like this, and they conquer it from tribes that used to be loyal to under the authority of the Kievan Rus. Okay. And then Russia's going to turn on the Mongols and conquer all their land and ally with the Kievan Rus, and that's how we get the name Russia with its capital of Moscow. So it's the descendants of Meshech and the descendants of Riphath. Remember, this is the Ural Mountains here, which seem to be headed by a nobility called the Rush. Okay, I believe, and I can't prove this, maybe someone will later, but I believe that the Rush are going to be the descendants of King Rusha. That's my conjecture, okay? So if we go to the Kievan Rus, you look at the overlap of their territory, notice where their original starting point is. They're down here. That's the limit to their territory. Well, here's the Don River, and there's this place called Rostov on Don, okay, and Rostov seems to be established by the Kievan Rus. There's also a Rostov up here, okay? So they seem to establish these cities called Rostov, and they established Kiev, but their core people are called the Rus, and their core territories, even though they're going to cover these areas, are eventually going to get immigrated in with the Hungaries descend, the Magyars descend, and I believe Magyars is a transliteration of Mongols, and the Huns are basically descended from the Mongols too. I believe the Hans of the northern Chinese and the Huns, there's a Hun River in Korea, these are all descended from the Mongols. And then you're going to have the Bulgars are also going to be descended from the Huns, and you're going to see the Volga Bulgars right here. These people are going to get pushed by the Mongols. Remember, the Huns are going to be in the days of, I think it's Pope Leo, so this is going to be around the 5th or 6th century. AD, and then the Mongols are going to be around the 11th or 12th century AD. So it's going to be like 500-600 years later that these people who were once descended from the Huns that went all the way between here and I believe North Korea and mixed with a bunch of Turkish and Mongol peoples are also going to, the Mongols are going to follow them, and they're going to push all these people to the west, and you're going to find, I'm actually playing Age of Empires right now, where you have all these Bulgars and these Huns and these different tribes that also all call their kings Khans that are being pushed by the Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan and his sons. Okay, but so that is going to disrupt the genetic mix and all this stuff of these people, but the core Riphean peoples seem to have their nobility named Rosh, and that suggests to me that nobility is descended from King Rusha. Again, could be wrong. This is a conjecture, but it's a reasonable conjecture based on all the information I'm looking at. Okay, and then they're going to again partner with the Muscovites, and that territory is going to become Russia, and it's going to start out. Watch this. Because they're all Eastern Orthodox. The Muscovites are going to kind of consolidate Russia as an Eastern Orthodox culture, which the Kievan Rus are also Eastern Orthodox. And unfortunately, that in the time that they're taking over from the Ukrainians, their core territory is mostly over here between the Muscovites and the Kievan Rus. So you see this territory. This is why people don't understand. Ukraine and Russia were never distinct. They do have distinction in their genetics because the Muscovites and the Rus or the Ripheans are different people groups. Japheth would have been a nephew to Meshach, okay? But their peoples have been mixed and have been a shared kingdom with each other since really going all the way back to like the 9th century AD. That's how old these connections are. The idea of the Ukrainians as a separate nation comes from the 1990s. That's how, see, Ukraine became a Russian province that broke away and became a separate nation. And they seem to have been infiltrated by people who were Nazi sympathizers and stuff like that from the Cold War on. Okay? So you have these people, you see Moscow here, and then you see Kiev here. Those are going to be the main cores of the Muscovites and the Rus. Okay? And they're partners in this, and then you see these Khanates right here because the Russians were married into the Khans, and they're going to turn on the Khans and then take over all of Russia to the east with the help of the Rus, who basically have their back here against Poland and Lithuania, who are their main rivals to the east. Okay, so these people are eventually going to all come together and become the Russian Empire. So a lot of history there, but what we have now makes a lot of sense. If the sons of Gomer are Ashkenaz, Riphesh, and Togarmah, it shouldn't be shocking to say, well, there's where the Germanic peoples come from, there's where your Slavic peoples come from, which the Rus would become a nobility among them and create the Kievan Rus, and then there's where your Turkish peoples come from. They're all accounted. There's where your Mongols come from, there's where your Cimmerians come from, there's where your Medes come from, there's where your Greeks come from, there's where your Georgians and probably some of your Central Russian peoples come from. There's where your Muscovites come from. And there's where your Thracians or your Northern Europe comes from. So we have all of Europe and Asia covered in these people. There's no people left out. And this is what most of your Bible scholars don't do. If you're going to say that Magog is Turkey, you need to come up with an explanation. If Magog is not Mongolia, where did the Mongols come from? If Magog is not North Koreans, where did the Koreans come from? Well, we can go to the Koreans and see where they came from. Because if you go to these people called, forget Gaijis, now go to Goguryeo. Now, Goguryeo is a kingdom, and it is named Goguryeo in the 1st century BC. Okay, so this is around the days of Philo of Alexandria's birth. Okay, that's when they're called Goguryeo. However, before this, remember, these words are going to be transliterated, and Gog seems to mean something like great one. So Goguryeo seems to mean great Koryo. Okay, and I think Koryo means like land or something. Oh, great, high, and beautiful. So great, beautiful heights. So these are highlands here. You see they're all mountainous right here. And these highlands are the great, beautiful heights. And their motto is son of the heavenly emperor. So they considered Gog, their great one, to be the son of God. That's what it seems to be, okay? Now, we can go back, and before that, there's a people, before it was called Goguryeo, it was called Jojo-Sion. So just like it's Goguryeo and Goria, it used to be called Jojo-Sion, and Joseon would be the short name, okay? So Joj seems to be like great, okay? And Joseon seems to be their land with beautiful highlands, and the language seems to change. Well, these nations are going to have different wars with the Chinese over the years. And the Chinese seem to, way back in ancient times, their northern Chinese seem to be invaded by Mongolians a lot. And that's why they have the northern part of China is called Inner Mongolia. That's why they build the Great Wall of China, which mostly happens in the 200 years before that. And that separates the Mongolians from the Chinese, even though they're mingled in and married in, and they all have similar features. If you look at Mongoloids and northern Chinese people, they don't look terribly different, but they're descended from Magog and Sine, okay? So this mix of people to the east of them, so you're going to have the Great Wall of China separating, it's basically cutting in between Inner Mongolia and Outer Mongolia, and to the east of them, you're going to have Goguryeo, which they all used to be related, but now they're separated by this growing Chinese empire, okay? So if you look at the Han Chinese Empire, the Han Chinese Empire is going to be bigger, okay? The Han Chinese Empire is going to cover most of inland China, not Tibet, all the way out to this protectorate here, which is going to connect with the Parthian Empire, and this is what it's going to be like in the days of the Roman Empire. So you're going to have Han, you're going to have this protectorate of theirs, which is going to be in Central Asia, and then notice how they've pushed the Koreans down here. And this is why Gog gets isolated from Magog. But remember, all of this used to be Mongolia, and later on, all of this is going to be Mongolia. But it's the Chinese that separate Gog from Magog. Okay? So Joseon, do you see what their emperor's name is? Gojong. What is their current ruling family's last name? Zhang. What does Gojong seem to mean then? The Great Zhang. That seems to be what that is. So Gog by itself seems to mean great one. Joseon, you see these Zhangs related to their ancient emperors, okay? Again, this Joseon is there's going to be two Joseons. There's going to be a Joseon, this is in the modern era, so 1300 AD, you see 1897. And it's around here that the Japanese start to invade and colonize. These people, there was always a South Korea. There's the Kingdom of the Three Scyllas, which is, I took East Asian history from a guy from China in my undergrad. And there's this Kingdom of the Three Scyllas in the south. And the peoples from here in China seem to have migrated into Japan and become the Japanese culture. And then the Japanese are going to come back around the 20th century, and they're going to take over this. And right before World War II, they're going to take over Manchuria and call it Manchukuo. Okay? Well, that's because they're descended from people who came from that, and they think they have rights to that land now. Okay? Remember, the Chinese took this from Goguryeo. So this used to all be Goguryeo, and then they used to be connected to Magog, which seems to be the father of Gog. And then, Gog is a descendant of his, it seems like. And then the Chinese would come and drive a wedge between them right here, and that's called Manchuria. Okay? Which seems to be a transliteration of Mongolia. Manchuria, Mongolia, Manchuria. Seems to just be a language shift to mean Mongolia. Okay, so this is called Inner Mongolia. This is called Manchuria, which is probably just a different language set. And then Mongolia makes sense. They're all just different ways of saying Mongolia or Magog. So if you go to Joseon and you go to its history, Go-Joseon with a G. So you see the Gog there, okay? Gog seems to be great land of the beautiful heights. So Go-Joseon used to be its name before it would later become Goguryeo. And this land, they claim to have existed from 2333 BC. Well, according to the Masoretic text, the flood was in 1656 BC. If you hold to a 1446 Exodus date, the flood is going to be around 1700 BC, so within 30 years of this, okay? The Chinese also account the Great Flood having occurred in 2300 BCE, okay? So between these two dates, you seem to have the period right before the flood. And what we seem to have, this is the research I'm doing on China, is that the Chinese and the Koreans both count the origins of their history all the way back to the time of Noah. And so even though they weren't necessarily in this land at the time, that's where they count their dynasty from. Well, guess what the book is named that the Koreans count this land from? We don't have the book anymore, but there was I believe it was a Chinese scholar back in the 1300s. The book is, I got to find the book because it was there. There's still Korean, just so you know, there's still Korean restaurants called Goji. Well, Goji was the name of their ancient history book. And we don't have it anymore, but the guy the book that accounts their lineage back to 2300 BC is called the Goji, okay? So I got to find, hold on. So Goji apparently in Chinese characters means ancient records and old chronicles. That's what it's come to mean. But that's the name of their ancient history. It's called the Goji, okay? Gogi. Their land is called the Go-Joseon, and it later becomes Goguryeo, okay? They have Gog all over their history. They have Gog and Zhong. And I've read, I don't know where I can find this now, but I have read an article by rabbinical scholars who said Zhong, this is when North Korea was starting to be a threat, but before they had nukes and way before, it's probably like 2006, something like that. I read that Zhong would be a Ashkenazi Jewish way of saying Gog. Zhong. So, Hanja means ancient records. Goji is the everyday Korean word for meat. This is interesting. So that's probably why you have Goji Korean restaurants. But it's also the name of the book of their ancient history is called the Jogi or Gogi. So it's got Gog right in the name of their most ancient history. And this claims to go back to the time of Noah, but it's lost now, okay? There's a Chinese guy in like the 13th century AD who claims to have founded it. Notice it says the Korean peninsula, let's see. This is the 12th century BC, following the establishment of Jojoseon, Jizi, known as Gaija. So you guys are talking about Gaijis. Remember, his real name is Kuka, okay? Here is the people who founded Jojoseon. Gija, a sage who belonged to the royal family from the Shang dynasty, immigrated to the northern part of the Korean peninsula and became the founder of Gija Goseon. So you see mixture with Chinese peoples here. So you have Chinese and Mongols mixing, and maybe Goja's who knows? It could be a Chinese Mongolian mix. Who knows? We don't know. But that's who Gog seems to be. And it makes sense because he's from the land of Magog. And if Magog is Mongolia, well, what's right next to Goguryeo is Mongolia in Manchuria. Okay? So, if we're going to Ezekiel 38, and he's Gog of the land of Magog, and the ASV is going to have this better, the Prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Why is he called the Prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal? I'm going to suggest that this means that North Korea is going to eventually be the leader in this great coalition. Why do I think this? Simple. He's younger, and literally North Korea right now is offering Iran a nuke. They're not afraid of anybody. See, China has a huge demographic and economic problem going on. Russia has a huge demographic and economic problem going on. So does North Korea, but they don't care. They went ahead and made nukes, and they didn't get bombed by the U.S. So who's Iran going to look to? China and Russia have been saying they got their back for years, but they won't let them have a nuke. They'll sell them weapons all day long that Israel can blow up because they're making money off them, but they're not going to help them get a nuke. They're in treaties with the West, even though they're claiming to be against the West. But North Korea is like, we'll give you a nuke. So let's look at what Gog does. Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Now why? Because the Gog Turks and the ultimate Mongolian Empire seems to have taken over all these lands in the Mongolian Empire. So is there a spiritual dominion related to this dominion over them? Could be, but the reason I say that he's tops of these guys is because he's an absolute dictator. He answers to no one, and his people worship him as a god. Now, if you understand how God understands a powerful ruler, go look at, remember, Daniel's contemporary of this, and if you go to Daniel in Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel is giving this prophecy to Nebuchadnezzar about 4 kingdoms. And here's the thing. Of all these kingdoms, Babylon is the smallest and the shortest of them. And yet God says it's superior. Why? Well, he says there's these 4 kingdoms. And he says, you are King of kings, whom God of heaven has given kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And whosoever the children of man dwell, the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, has he given in your hand, and has made thee to rule over them all. Thou art the head of gold. Okay? After thee, another kingdom shall arise inferior to thee. Now, wait a minute. The Persians conquer Babylon, and they have a much bigger kingdom, and it lasts for hundreds of years, even though this one lasts about 100 years. So how is it inferior? Simple. There's no absolute dictatorial monarch over it. See, Nebuchadnezzar has his picked heirs ruling until his kingdom falls to the Persian. Even though he goes mad for 7 years, nobody overthrows him. That's what a power he has over the nation. Even though he goes absolutely crazy for 7 years, nobody overthrows him. Okay? The Persians keep getting, first of all, they start out as the Medes and Persians, so it's a co-opted empire. They have kind of dual monarchy going on, and they're constantly overthrowing each other. Different brothers and stuff are constantly overthrowing each other. So they're not as unified as they are. The Greeks conquer them right away, but immediately break up into 4 kingdoms that are always fighting against each other. The Romans conquer them, but they break up into dual monarchy, and they're always having civil wars and fighting at each other. But you never had that with Babylon. That's why he's superior. He's superior because he has absolute control and his people worship him as a god. Okay? Compare that to North Korea. He has absolute control over his people. Nobody's going to dare overthrow their family, and they worship him as a god. It's been 3 generations of his family ruling as absolute dictators. They're essentially a monarchy, and nobody's trying to overthrow them. So he's like Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Russia has been overthrown several times. Remember, they went from being in the past 120 years, they have gone from being the Russian Empire to the Soviet Union to the Russian state, and then Putin's been ruling now for about 40 years, but he's getting old, and he has to negotiate with oligarchs for what he does. China has started out as Republic of China. It was overthrown to become Communist China. Communist China has been ruling since then, but it's really been, not to publicize overthrows of the people who led the Communist Party over time. And Xi Jinping is now ruling as an absolute dictator, but stuff is kind of slipping from his grasp right now. Okay, North Korea has his stuff on lock. He has his stuff on lock. He got nukes, even though the U.S. was saying you're never going to get a nuke, just like they're saying to Iran. He got nukes. So who's the king of these guys? Who's number one? Based on God's economy and way of looking at things, North Korea is number one. That's why he's the prince, okay? So, if you look at Ezekiel 38, I am not saying Russia's not a part of this and a major part of this. He is. Rosh and Meshech are Russia, and Tubal is Georgia. Okay? Or it could be considered Tubalsk. Okay? So these peoples are in Russia, Ukraine, and Georgia. Now, those are 3 separate countries. Doesn't that make a lot more sense than all of this is just saying a way of saying Turkey? Turkey was never a single country in all of ancient history. It didn't become a single country until the 20th century. So the idea that God is going to say, oh, that's all Turkey. Turkey was never seen as an entity. That's a very recent thing, okay? So he says, I am against thee, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. He says, I will turn thee about and put hooks in thy jaws and bring thee forth all thine army and thy horsemen, all of them clothed in full armor, and a company with a great company with buckler and shield, all of them handling swords. Now listen, these people all have their own weapons production. They are all handling swords, okay? Meshech and Gog have nukes. Persia, Cush, and Put are with them, so that's Sudan, Iran, and Put, all of them with shield and helmet. Notice they don't have swords. Where do they get their weapons from? And the answer is Russia and North Korea. That's where they get their weapons from. North Korea is offering Iran a nuke now. It says, Gomer and all his hordes, the house of Togarmah, the uttermost parts of the north, and all his hordes, even many peoples with thee, be thou prepared, ye prepare thyself, and all thy companies that are assembled unto me, and be thou a guard unto them. Pay attention to this. Russia is invading Ukraine, claiming to guard Russian peoples. But now, who is the one who is saying to be a guard of them? Is he saying Russia? No, he's saying Gog. Be a guard unto them, okay? Watch this. This is current headlines. Iran's missile technology does not come from Russia. It comes from North Korea.
Nuclear.
People have been commenting on this for a while now. Iran's nuclear program, including their missile program, is been supported by Kim Jong-un. So he is now saying, we're going to help you guys with your nuke program as a way of deterrence against the West, because if they take you, we're all next. This is what North Korea is saying. If Persia falls, we're next. If they get away with taking out the government in Iran, they will get away with taking out the government in North Korea. If Russia and China don't step up to back up Iran, they're not going to step up to back up North Korea. Pay attention to what Kim Jong-un is doing. He is telling Russia and China, don't be punks. Stand up now, or they're coming for us next. And if they get North Korea, then next is they're going to get rid of the Chinese Communist Party and the Russian Communist Party. And these neocons are out to do that. The Russian Communist Party has already fallen, but the Putin government they want next, okay? And they want to see the Chinese Communist Party fall. The neocons are all about that. But right now, they're pointing at Russia or they're pointing at Iran and North Korea because they're not part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and they're not in the Security Council of the UN. So the whole world is shifting, but the one who seems to be pushing the dial is not Putin, it's Kim Jong-un, okay? Which makes sense if Gog is the one who's going to be a guardian to them. He's like, stand up, we're going to protect Iran. After many days, all people shall be visited. In the latter years, you shall come to a land brought back from the sword that is gathered out of many peoples upon the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual ways, but is brought forth out of the peoples, and they shall dwell securely, all of them. Now, people are saying, well, they're dwelling securely. That doesn't. Israel has defense walls, so that doesn't mean they're dwelling securely. No. They were persecuted all over the world. Now they're dwelling securely in their own land. That's what that means, okay? Thou shalt ascend, and shall come like a storm, be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy hordes, and many people with thee. So no, it's all thy hordes, the hordes of who? Gog, and many peoples with him, okay? Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, it will come to pass in that day that things will come into thy mind, and thou shalt devise an evil device, and say, I will go up to the land of unwalled village, and go to them that are rest, that dwell securely, all them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. Notice he's not saying, I'm going to go up against Israel. Okay? The device that's coming into the mind of Gog is not saying I'm going to go up against Israel. That's not the device that's coming to his mind. God is saying, I'm going to drag you against Israel. The device that's going up to his mind is saying he's going to go up against the people of unwalled villages who dwell securely. Well, who dwells securely without walls or villages? We keep reading. Thou shalt ascend, thou shalt come like a storm, thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and thy hordes and many peoples with thee. Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, it will come to pass in the day that things will come in your mind, thou shalt devise an evil decree, and thou shalt say, I will go up to a land of unwalled villages, to them who are at rest, who dwell securely, all them dwelling without walls with either bars or gates. Well, people say, well, that can't be Israel, and that can't be today, because Israel has bars and gates around their settlements, and around between them and the West Bank. He's not saying Israel right here. God is saying he'll drag them against Israel. They're having an idea to go up against people with unwalled villages. Well, who are those people? To take a spoil and prey, to turn thy hand against the waste places that are now inhabited, and against the people that are gathered out of many nations. Oops. And have gotten cattle and goods and dwell in the middle of the earth. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee. Well, wait a minute. Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou assembled the company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, and take away cattle and goods and a great spoil? Well, wait a minute. Are they talking about literal cattle being taken from Israel? Like North Korea is going to come into Israel and take over cattle? No. This land without walls or villages where the people dwell at ease is not Israel. It's Arabia. And in fact, if you go to Jeremiah 49, notice it's cited right here. He talks about, flee ye, wander far ye off, O ye depths, you inhabitants of Hazor, said Jehovah, for Nebuchadnezzar, king, has taken counsel against you and has conceived a purpose against you. Notice this is Hazor. Arise, I will go up into a nation that is thee, that dwells at ease, say Jehovah, that has neither gates nor bars, that dwell alone. Wow, that sounds exactly like what Ezekiel says. Ezekiel starts his prophesying right after Jeremiah. Okay? So this is not something that is just like, if you're a student of the prophets like Daniel, you're like, I don't know what he's talking about. Jeremiah just prophesied this. Take their camels shall be a beauty, and the multitude of their cattle a spoil, and I will scatter unto the winds them that have the corners of the hair cut off. I will bring the calamity out of every side of them, says Jehovah. Well, who's them who have the corners of the hairs cut off? Well, the Israelites weren't allowed to do that. And Hazor shall be a dwelling place of jackal, a desolation forever. No man shall dwell there, neither shall any man sojourn there. The word of the Lord of Jeremiah, let's see. I apologize. So this is Hazor he says this about. Well, where's Hazor? There is a Hazor in Israel, in the Upper Galilee region. The Hazor that Nebuchadnezzar prophesies against at is related to the Hazor that Jeremiah is prophesying against, that Nebuchadnezzar is going to come get, is related to Kedar. This is the kingdom of Kedar around the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, Kedar is right here. Hazor is somewhere around here. It's another city that Nebuchadnezzar destroyed, and it's known for these warriors that are going to go back and forth and raid different caravans. But we see them trading with sheep in the days of Ezekiel. This is Kedar. Okay, Jeremiah says this Hazor is going to go down and be burnt and never inhabited again. So we don't know where this is. Okay, but we know it's related to Kedar. So who's the land of unwalled villages? Where is all this? It's Arabia. So who are the people who are fat and rich and dwell in unwalled villages? They're the Arabians. So now, let's look at this. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish. Who are the allies of the Arabians? The merchants of Tarshish are the English and the Americans. Sheba and Dedan are the descendants of Abraham that dwell among the Arabians. Okay? So these are literally the Arabians and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof. So we assume that's all the allies of the Americans, including people like Canada and Australia and New Zealand. They shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Are there assembly as a company to take prey, to carry away silver and gold and cattle and goods of great spoil? Who has a lot of cattle and goods and silver and gold? The Arabians. Okay? And that Hazor, which is talked about in Jeremiah 39, is an Arabian city. So he says, thou son of man, prophesy unto Gog. Gog is after the Arabians. Well, think about this. Why? If Kim Jong-un is willing to support the Iranians, who do the Iranians and the Russians want to take out? The Arabians. They want to control the flow of oil to Europe. And Kim Jong-un wants to be at the head of that. So he's offering nukes to Iran to change the New World Order, or to change the world order away from the West towards the East. So he says, thus saith the people of Jehovah, in that day when my people Israel dwell securely, shall thou not know it. So it's going to be in a day that Israel dwells securely. They're going to want to go up to these lands of unwalled villages, which we just saw are in Arabia. But they need to take out Israel to do it, because Israel and Arabia are going to be allies. So he says, thou shalt come out of thy place from the uttermost parts of the north. Okay, so if we look at the meaning of uttermost parts of the north, Saphon means hidden, dark, as in north quarter, gloomy and unknown. From thy place, rear, recess, border, quarter side. So in other words, he's the remotest of these peoples that are coming against him. Well, where are all these people coming? They're all coming from the north and east of Israel. And he's the remotest of them. That's North Korea. So he says, come out of the north parts, and thou shalt come against my people Israel as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days. I will bring judgment against thee in my land, and the heathen may know me, that I will be sanctified with me, O Gog, in their eyes. So who's with them? North Korea, the stand countries, so the Turkish peoples, excluding Turkey, but the stand countries, Russia, probably North Korea to the extent that the Russians have conquered them. Belarus is also descendants of Rosh. And then you have Georgia and Armenia, which I expect Russia to come in there and take that over after they're done with Ukraine. And then ultimately, this is going to end up with all this huge army, with North Koreans as a major part of it, coming against Israel. Now, the North Koreans are already coming into Ukraine and fighting with the Russians. They're coming in there to rebuild and fortify the lands that the Russians are taking. So they're already getting very involved in World War III. It says, thus saith Lord God, art he you whom I have spoken by the time of my servants the prophet Israel, which prophesied in those days many years that I would bring thee against them. So this is what he's saying. Art thee whom have I have spoken in old time by my servants, the prophets of Israel. So in the days of Ezekiel, he's saying he's the one who God has spoken of. Okay? Well, who has he spoken of him with? Joel. He's spoken of him with Joel. He's also spoken of him figuratively with Micah as the Assyrian, okay? Because ultimately they're going to all coalesce their armies in Assyria and then attack Israel from there. All these great lands, okay? So he says, it shall come to pass that time when God will come against the land of Israel, that saith the Lord, that my fury shall come up to my face. So again, the lands they want to take a spoil from is not Israel, it's Arabia, but Israel is on the way to Arabia, and they need to take Israel to get to Arabia. They're not just going to go south through this massive desert between Jordan and Arabia and all die of thirst on their way getting there. Even modern armies need water, okay? You don't just bring a bunch of water with you. You're talking about marching armies. Even a mechanized army needs a supply chain of getting water down through there, and they need to take the coast of Israel to secure what they're trying to do. For in my jealousy and in my fire and wrath I have spoken, surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea, the fowls of the heaven, the beasts of the field, the creeping things of the earth, and all men that are on the face of the earth shall shake in my presence. This is in Revelation chapter 6. And the mountains will be thrown down. Remember, mountains fall on us and hide us from the wrath of the Lamb. And the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. Okay? Notice there is a great earthquake that takes out all the great walls in Israel. Remember what God says in Micah 5. He says he's going to take down all their strongholds. He's going to humble them. There's going to be a great earthquake. I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains. So who is he calling for a sword against? He's going to call for a sword against Gog. So this seems to be happening within the context of Revelation 6 and this great earthquake and all the rich and the bond and free going underground and hiding from the wrath of the Lamb. This great earthquake seems to knock those walls down. And then the sword, he calls for a sword against them in all their mountains. So it seems like at this earthquake, there you go, their defenses are down, we're going in. Okay? I will plead against him with pestilence and blood. I will rain upon him and upon his bands, and many people with him, overflowing with rain and great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Boy, doesn't that sound like a lot like Joel? Well, rain, great hailstones, fire, and brimstone is probably nukes. Could be actual rain and hailstones. Fire and brimstone. Could be hail mixed with fire. He's done that before. But this is probably nukes, based on what we see in the next chapter. Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself. I'll be known in the eyes of many nations. They shall know that I am the Lord. Therefore thou sayest, man, prophesy against Gog, and say, behold, I am against thee, Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I will turn thee about, I will lead thee on. Listen to what he says. I will turn thee about and will lead thee on and cause thee to come out of the uttermost parts of the north, and I will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. So God is manipulating this. God is causing this to happen. What is God's problem with Gog? Remember what Goguryeo's motto is. Son of the Emperor of Heaven. Son of God, basically. Okay? Remember that Kim Jong-un is worshipped as a god, and if you get caught with a Bible in his country, he will put you and your whole extended family for generations, including your unborn generations, into a work camp to death. He is God in his land, and God does not like this because he's trying to get the gospel to all the nations before the end comes. This is the biggest stronghold standing in the way of the gospel reaching the ends of the earth. He is in the remote quarters of the north, the literal ends of the earth, and he won't let the gospel in. The gospel needs to reach the ends of the earth before the end comes. So he says, I will smite thy bow out of thy left hand, that's their missile launchers, and cause thine arrows to fall out of their right hands, that's their missiles. They're not literally using bows and arrows. I find people who are anti-futurism are like, oh, that's a battle that must have already happened because nobody uses bows and arrows anymore. You do not have any war or battle in history that remotely resembles this. This is either a false prophecy, an unfulfilled prophecy, or alternatively, it's only at the end of the millennium. Somehow the Jews are going to get scattered from Israel under the nose of Christ in the millennium because it talks about them being regathered at the end, and everyone's going to go back to fighting them with bows and arrows and spears. That's dumb. Learn to look at symbols and use common sense. Thou shalt fall on the mountains of Israel, thou and all thy hordes and the people that are with thee, and I will give thee to the ravenous birds of every sort, sword, and the beasts of the field to be devoured. Thou shalt fall in the open field, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord. I will send fire on Magog. Okay? Now pay attention. If Gog is Goguryeo of the land of Magog, what's the land of Magog? Well, he's not going to nuke Mongolia. Magog, remember, once controlled most of China and all of Russia and Ukraine and all this stuff. So where are these nukes going? Probably not to China. I don't think China's going to be involved in the nuclear war because they seem to come out as the power player in the last days after this. So I think they're going to stay out of this conflict in a major way. They're probably going to try to take Taiwan at the same time, but they seem to stay out of this conflict. What I think Magog is Russia. That's the wider Mongolian Empire where Russia's nukes are stored. They don't store them in Mongolia, but they store them in lands that used to belong to Mongolia. They're not going to keep them right in shooting range of short-range ballistics and stuff like that. They're going to be in the center of Russia, just like ours are in the center of America. It says, my holy name I will make known in the midst of the people of Israel. I will suffer my holy name to be profane, and more nations will know that I am Jehovah, one in Israel. So I will send fire on Magog and them that dwell securely in the isles. Okay? Well, the isles, remember, can mean coasts. It can mean borders. But where do I think this is? I think those are the coastal cities of America. I think that's why they don't name them, and they just call them that dwell securely in the isles, because America does not have a national name. It is a whole conglomerate of peoples and always has been. So I think those who dwell securely in the isles is America, and I think Magog is Russia. And most Bible commentators and prophecy scholars who are futurists have held that is reasonable. This is why people think Gog is Russia. I think Gog is North Korea. I think Magog is Russia. Rosh, Meshach, but the land of Magog is essentially Russia. It's where again, this all used to be run by the Mongolians, and then the Russians took it over. So this is my holy name I will make known in the midst of many people, Israel. It said, behold, it comes, it shall be done, says the Lord Jehovah. This is the day whereof I have spoken of. So if this prophecy is so that the nations will know that he is the Lord, let's think here. Is that in the millennium? Don't they know he's the Lord in the millennium when he's come out of heaven and destroyed all the armies with a word? I think that's when they know he's the Lord. This is so that the nations will know that the God of Israel, the God of the Old Testament, is the true God. Okay? So when is that going to be? Somewhere between here and Christ coming back. Simple. Okay? I will, and they that dwell in the city of Israel shall go forth and make fires of the weapons and burn them, both shields and bucklers, bows and arrows and handstaffs and spears, and they shall make fires of them 7 years. What do I think is going on here? Why are they going to grab their weapons and make fires of them? Now, I tend towards the belief that this is going to lead to a nuclear dissolution treaty, and Israel is going to be a major recipient from the energy and electricity that comes from that nuclear dissolution, because what has been being researched in the present with AI is figuring out, one, is how to quickly commission a nuclear energy plant. This is a big part of the reason why they're going to say, we want to get rid of the nukes in all these countries, so just America has them, basically, and Russia and blah, 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 and we're going to give them nuclear plants, and we've got AI tasked with how to get a nuclear plant up and going fast. We're also figuring out how to downgrade nuclear weapons technology for fuel energy, rather than enriching uranium for nuclear weapons from energy grade uranium. They're working on processes to quickly downgrade it. This is going to lead to probably a nuclear drawback or an outright nuclear dissolution after a nuclear war happens. They're going to probably make nuclear treaties that allow for these plants to be built quickly. Israel is probably going to be a major recipient of that energy because they were attacked. And they're probably going to center a lot of AI technology around Israel and Saudi Arabia at that point. I would expect that. So that they shall take no wood out of the field, nor cut down any out of the forest. They shall make fires of the weapons, and they shall plunder those that plundered them, and rob those that robbed them. You want to read Isaiah 14? No, I'm sorry. You want to read Isaiah 17 about Damascus? It also ends with those who... this is the portion of them that spoil them and the lot of them that rob us. Okay, so they rob those who are out to rob them. Okay? So they're after Israel and Saudi Arabia. That seems to be what the goal is, but Israel needs to go down first. Okay? So, for 7 months, okay, so it says it'll come to pass that they'll have a burying. So they're going to have 7 years of Israel not needing to heat their homes with anything but weapons. And I believe that's nuclear fuel. I believe they're going to get nuclear energy and not have to cut down anything for heat. Then Gog is going to be buried for 7 months. I don't believe this happens in the eternal state, because after Gog-Magog comes up against the Lord in the end of the book of Revelation, the whole earth is dissolved by God showing up. Fire from heaven destroys them all. Why would they need to bury him after that? It literally says the heaven and earth departed, because there is no more room for them, because God literally goes from being outside the universe, upholding it, to inside the universe, burning everything down. 7 months shall the house of Israel be burying them, and they cleanse the land. Yea, all the people in the land shall bury them. It shall be to them a renown in the day that I shall be glorified, says the Lord Jehovah. And they shall set apart men of continual employment, and shall pass through the land with them that pass through, that bury those that remain in the face of the land to cleanse it. And at the end of 7 months they shall search, and if they pass through the land, and he shall pass through, if anyone sees a man's bone, they shall set up a sign on it, and the barriers have buried it in the land of Ham and Gog. Now, Israel does have neutron bombs, I believe, and neutron bombs can literally dissolve these people down to the bones with a flash that doesn't necessarily make a kinetic explosion. It's just radiated heat. It microwaves them, okay? We've had the neutron bomb, I think, since the 80s, so Israel probably has it too, okay? That's probably what they're using here. It would be a nuclear blast, but it would, and I believe it does cause radiation, it just doesn't cause kinetic explosions. So that seems to be how they're taking these people out. And then it says Hamona shall be the name of the city, and thus so Ham and Gog is what it is. So Hamona, and thus they shall cleanse the land. So what are they doing? They're searching the land. They're probably guys in rad suits searching the land and burying all the bones of these people because they don't want the land polluted. And the goal is why? Because we don't want animals coming after these bodies and bones and stuff like this and dragging this radiated material throughout here. And thou, son of man, saith the Lord Jehovah, speak to the birds of every source and the beasts of the field. Assemble yourselves, come together on every side of the sacrifice that I do sacrifice for you, even the great sacrifice in the mountains of Israel, that you may eat flesh and drink blood. And you shall eat the flesh of the mighty and drink the blood of the princes of the earth and the rams, the goats, and the bullocks, and all of them, and the fatlings of Bashan. And you shall eat and be filled and drink blood until they're drunk in my sacrifice that I have sacrificed for you. And you shall be filled at my table with horses and chariots and mighty men and with men of war. Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, and I will set my glory among the nations, and the nations shall see my judgment I have executed that I have upon them. Now, all of this language here seems to match Armageddon. But remember, we just announced a 7-year period between the Gog-Magog and this. Okay? So the house of Israel will know that I'm Jehovah God from that day forward, and the nations will know that Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they trespassed against me, and I hid my face from them. So I have given them in the hands of their adversaries, and they shall fall by the sword. So all this stuff about his table, remember the Lord's table, this is the wedding banquet feast, if you will, and it's the animals being invited to drink the blood of kings and princes. This is all in Revelation 19. So it seems to truncate the 7-year period of Daniel's 70th week and the 7 years of them gathering the weapons, and then it seems to jump right here to the Lord's second coming. But it doesn't get into the Antichrist and all that stuff, okay? Then you'll drink and be full. I will set my glory among the nations, and all nations will see my judgment. The house of Israel will know that I am Jehovah their God, and the nations will know that the house of Israel went into captivity according to their uncleanness. Therefore saith the Lord Jehovah, I will bring back the captivity of Jacob, and I will have mercy on the whole house of Israel, and I will be jealous for my holy name. And they shall bear their shame and their trespasses where they have trespassed against me, when they shall dwell securely in their land, and none shall make them afraid. So this is happening when they dwell in their land, and none make them afraid, when I have brought them back from the peoples and gathered them out of their enemies' lands, and I have sanctified them in the sight of many nations. I am sanctified in them in the sight of many nations, and they shall know that I am Jehovah their God, and I caused them to go into captivity among the nations, and I have gathered them unto their own land, and I will leave none of them there anymore. So within this context, this is Daniel's 7th week, all of the Israelites are gathered back in the land, it seems. Neither will I hide my face from them anymore, for I have poured out my spirit in the house of Israel, saith the Lord. So his face doesn't necessarily mean his literal face. God turning his face from Israel is about God giving them over to blindness until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. Him pouring his spirit out on them seems to start with 144,000. Okay? Why is this happening now? Because the fullness of the Gentiles has come in now. What happened? Gog, which is North Korea, it actually talks about 5/6 of their people. Where does it say this? He says, I will turn thee back and leave but a 1/6 part of thee, and will cause thee to come out of the north parts, and I will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. He's taking 5 out of 6 of every one of their soldiers. North Korea is going to lose 5 out of 6 of every one of their soldiers in this battle, which means how easy can South Korea then take over North Korea at this point? 5/6 of their army is gone. They went from having, whatever, a couple million trained men to a few 100,000. And now you have Japan and probably the remnants of the U.S. and Australia and North Korea all involved, and they go in there. And they don't just go in there with armies, they go in there with the gospel in a huge way. There are a ton of Christians in South Korea. And even though they might be a lot of charismatics and seeker-friendly and all kinds of stuff, it doesn't matter. The gospel is going to get to North Korea, and they're going to accept it, probably all of them. It'll probably be a massive harvest for the gospel. And just so you guys know, there are massive harvests for the gospel going on all over the world right now. It's sucking in America, but still quite a few people in America are accepting the gospel. When people talk about this great harvest, you guys, there is a great harvest happening right now. America is very much apostate, but that's because we have the white horse primarily coming to us. We are diluting. We're the major diluting influence in the world right now. But when you go into Africa, in Southeast Asia, India, Iran, all these countries are having a revival and the gospel is spreading and people are getting saved left and right. And the last one to go is going to be Gog-Magog. So when that falls and the gospel goes in a big way, first of all, the whole world is going to see this and be like, that's God. And so many people that were on the fence are going to give their lives to Christ when this happens. When this happens, you're going to have the world largely full of people who've accepted Christ and people who have hardened their hearts against Christ, and they see this and they don't want to follow God for nothing. Okay? At that point, he's not going to hide his face from Israel anymore. Their hardening is done. He's poured out his spirit on them, and we're going into Daniel's 70th week. So you're still going to have Jews that are going to be hard-hearted and follow the Antichrist. You're still going to have people in the world that are going to be hard-hearted and persecute the church. But the hardening of Israel is done at the end of this war. So what happens corresponding to this war? In Revelation chapter 6, you have the kings of the earth and great men, chief captains, everyone in their saying, "Fall on us and hide us from the wrath of the Lamb." That's that same great earthquake he talks about. You have the stars of heaven fall from the earth, even as a fig casts her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. Heaven departed as a scroll as is rolled together. What is going on here? This is probably a foretaste of the second coming, or a foretaste of God coming at the end of the millennium. But what this probably is the coming of the Antichrist, because it starts with the white horse, with the man on the bow with the white horse, and so this seems like the coming of Christ, but it's not, because this stuff's going to repeat itself. See in Revelation 16, and the island fled away, and there's great hail out of heaven, and man blasphemed God. I forget where it says, but the sun, the moon, and stars withdraw their shining, all this stuff twice in the book of Joel. The first time is prompting the coming of the Antichrist. The second time is prompting the coming of Christ. And then after this, you have the 144,000 of Israel being sealed. And I believe they're being sealed and anointed sealed by the Holy Spirit and anointed to preach the gospel throughout Israel. Because you're getting 144,000 of them, which is enough to go 2 by 2, house by house, and each 2 witnesses have to reach about 100 to 200 people to go door by door, house to house, preaching the gospel to everyone in Israel. You got 3.5 years to reach about 200 people each. And they seem to be living in the houses that they're going to as they're going. And they're going to be following the same protocol that the 12 and the 70 went through, where they go to the house, and if their peace is on them, they say the kingdom of heaven has come near you, and they preach Christ to them. If not, their peace returns them, they shake the dust off their feet. And it'll be worse in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah for that town. They seem to repeat these 144,000 what the 12 and the 70 did in the days of Christ. The fullness of the Gentiles has now come into the faith. They're all sealed. And what's going to go on for the last 3.5 years? Well, these new Christians are being discipled. Christians are being persecuted. And this is all covered in Daniel, which we're going to get into in my book. Again, I'm going to go through Ezekiel and Daniel after I'm done with Chronicles. And those people are all going to basically be refined through the process of the first 3.5 years. In that process, look, if we go to Daniel 11, remember how Jesus says wisdom is justified by her children. So we're the children of wisdom. Wisdom is the Holy Spirit. It's another name for the Holy Spirit, okay? So when you see that, so what are we called in Daniel? To distinguish us from the believing Jews. The Christians are called the wise, okay? They're the children of wisdom, the wise. So in the KJV, it says, they that understand of the people will instruct many. The ASV says, they that are wise among the people will instruct many. And it says, yet they shall fall by the sword and flame and captivity and spoil many days. How do they fall by sword? They're in the cities that get nuked. They're in the cities that get hit with war. They're going to be plundered. And they're going to be put into prison camps. That's how they die. A lot of them, okay? Notice it says, they that are wise, and they shall fall by the sword. And when they fall, they should be helped with little help, but many will join to themselves to them in flatteries. What are going to happen? You're probably going to have the Christian nationalists joining the kings of the East. So the help that comes to them is going to be from people with ulterior motives, using the Christians as a block because they still have money, they still have people, and they're probably going to get them to join the kings of the east against the Antichrist. And it says, and of them that are wise shall fall to refine and purify and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it's for a time yet appointed, okay? So when is the time of the end? Simple. It says, and at the time of the end, the king of the south shall contend with him. The king of the north shall come against him with a whirlwind, with chariots, and horsemen, and many ships, and he shall enter into many countries and overflow them. That's the time of the end, okay? He shall enter into the glorious land, that's Israel. These shall be delivered out of his hand. He shall stretch forth his hand upon countries, and Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold of the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So he's about to invade Libya and Ethiopia after taking Egypt, but tidings out of the east and north shall trouble him, and he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly sweep away many, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, that's the Gaza plain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now, props to John Brisson, if this is the case. Who is talking about taking over the Gaza plain right now? Trump. He plants his palace, but there's got to be a big something with Trump's name on it in the Gaza plain if they get this. So it could be Trump. It could be Trump. I'm not saying it can't be Trump. I'm just saying I'm not going to draw that conclusion. Okay? At that time, Michael shall stand up. When? The time of the end. At that time, Michael the great prince shall stand up. That's the restrainer who stands for the children of thy people. There shall be a time of trouble, which never there was since there was a nation until that time. This line is in Irenaeus against heresies. A time of trouble such as there never was before, never shall be again. He's going to summarize this from here in Matthew 24. And he says, Irenaeus of Lyon says the harpazo, the rapture, happens at that time. Okay, he says after the church is suddenly harpazoed from this, there's going to be a time of great trouble such as there never was and nor will be again. He's quoting this in Matthew 24. Jesus is quoting this. That's when Michael shall stand up. That's when the restrainer arises out of the way to go cast Satan down to the earth, and that's when thy people shall be delivered. Remember, he says, look up, your redemption draws near, everyone that is found written in the book. So those who are written in the book of life, remember, everyone has made their stand by this time. The Jews have decided whether or not they believe. The Gentiles have decided whether or not they believe. The fullness of the Gentiles has come in. Everyone who's written in the book is going to be delivered. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall wake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and contempt. This is all the time to judge the dead in Revelation 11. And they that are wise, remember, we're the children of wisdom. Wisdom is justified by our children. They that are wise shall shine in the brightness of the firmament like stars. Remember, Paul's going to describe this in 1 Corinthians 15. And they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. This is in 1 Corinthians 15. It also goes back to ancient times when people believed that the good people arose and became stars when they died. Okay? What they're trying to produce through their Book of the Dead and their occult worship and all their stuff to arise and become like the gods or like the angels, like the Elohim, shining like the stars, is what we do. They don't do that because we do it through grace, not works. Okay? And so the idea of becoming like the gods, like the Elohim, another word for angels, we become angelic. We glow like Jesus glowed at the Mount of Transfiguration, like the stars. He's the Son of Righteousness. We are like the stars. So just like the sun and the stars reflect the glory of Christ in reference to the angels. In other words, they're these glorious shining stars that we see in the night sky. But when the sun rises, they all fade away and disappear in comparison, okay? That is a picture of Christ and the angels. Well, we replace those angels that fell. We replace the administration of Satan, which is an administration of judgment and condemnation and accusation and temptation, and we become an administration of righteousness and reconciliation and counsel and wisdom. And so those Bible verses that say, the angels will prevent you from even dashing your foot against a stone. That's what we do in the millennium. We are righteously ministering people and pointing them to Christ and all this stuff, whereas we're not following them around like Satan trying to tempt them and then accusing them. We're carrying out the ministry that Satan should have carried out with his angels if he wasn't wicked. Okay? And so in the millennium, people were like, why do you need a millennium? Because the Melchizedek priesthood failed right after Noah died. Because the ministry of Satan, God didn't create Satan to be a tempter. He created him to be a helper. But he decided to be a tempter because he realized, as long as I can keep the child from growing up, the butler rules the house forever. That's why Satan did what he did. He didn't want us to mature. He didn't want us to become like God. So he lied to us to say, if you want to become like God, you need to sin. And Jesus came and says, no, if you want to become like God, you need to obey God. He was going to make you like God. That was his original plan, to make them in his image and likeness. He was going to make you like God. It was already going to happen. You just had to obey God to make it happen. And he's leading you from becoming like the dirt to becoming like the sons, the Bene Elohim, the angels, the sons of God. Like Christ himself, the angel of the Lord, who's the firstborn of the dead. And he comes and he merges himself in with humanity to become the firstborn of the dead and the firstborn of clay creation, because he came into human flesh in his divinity and put that on and merged the two together. Now you can become like God even though you came from the dirt. That's what God is doing. That was always his plan. Satan got in the way and God just said, no, all you're doing is making my ministry of righteousness that's going to replace you all the more gracious, because they know how hard it is to be tempted. They know the temptations of our flesh, just like Jesus did. And so all you're doing in all your temptations is creating a bunch of people with the empathy and the wisdom and the kindness of Jesus Christ. That's all you're doing. You're failing at everything you try. You try to make these people wicked. You try to turn them from God. But he said, I'm going to take all the people who just trust God. That's all they have to do is trust God. And I'm going to take them and I am going to turn them into a ministry that you could never be, because you never knew what it was like to be forgiven. That's what you get for trying to be wicked, for trying to best me by turning everyone against me. That's going to be how this ends. And the wise will shine like the stars forever. The stars that are Satan's angels are cast down to the earth. The stars that are Christ's angelic host of saints are going to rise up and replace them. Amen. So, hope you guys are blessed by this. It's Sunday, I know, but we'll get into these things. Again, we'll cover this again in detail when I get into Ezekiel and Daniel. We're going to go through this line by line until you guys understand all of this, because I want to be, and I want you to be, some of the wise. I don't want to attract a group of listeners who are just listening to me and be like, oh, Aaron's channel is good. Let me drop a super chat there and give him $50. And I don't want that. I don't want to just sell my books. I want to, when I get to heaven, hear that hundreds of you picked up what I was teaching and said, I can do this too. I can explain this to people too. I want you to see how I'm learning and how I'm understanding this. So if I get taken out, maybe I do, or maybe I'm not that good at this. Maybe I'm good at research but bad at communication. Maybe I suck at YouTube production. Maybe I'm just not the most attractive or likable person, and I'm not as good at this as somebody else could be with my knowledge base and my understanding on how to research, plus your giftings at communication, your capacity to love people, your connections, your other talents, and you take that and you go forward. And if I could stand before God and God could say, hey, you only led 30, 40 people in your life to Christ, but the people that you taught led hundreds and hundreds more. That's more that's going to go to my account. That my life that God redeemed from sin says, if you just tried to make yourself great, you would have not done so great. But because you're trying to make other people great, you're making yourself even greater. Because that's what Christ did with me. That's why he said, greater things will you do if I go away. See, the whole goal is to pour what you have from God into other people so they can pour it into other people, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And God gets more glory, but you get more credit if you don't hang on and you... I don't want people to think I'm just smart and I've got all this secret knowledge. I want to show you where I'm getting it. It's not a secret. It's all available to you. So I want you guys to be the best Bible students, the best Bible teachers you can be. I want you to be the guys that the people are listening to when these 144,000 are going through and they're all anointed, but they're on your YouTubes and they're absorbing your stuff. I want you guys to be the people who are teaching the people in the last days. I want some of you to be the people who go into North Korea and help preach the gospel in the last days. I would love that. That would be awesome to hear. So anyways, I hope you guys are blessed by this. I hope you, again, take this stuff in and just go through the Table of Nations and just use this as a backbone. Maybe I'm wrong on some stuff. Maybe you're going to do more research. Maybe the information's going to get better and you're going to improve upon what I've done, just like I think, improved upon some of the stuff that the people have done before me. The goal is not for any one of us to be right on everything, but us to keep getting better in our understanding as knowledge increases. So we can increase our knowledge with the world towards AI and technology and all the different sins that they can figure out, or we can increase our knowledge towards better understanding the Word of God, being better able to minister it to people, being better able to transmit the information as fast and as far as we can, and just be useful to God. So I hope you guys are taking that in. I hope you guys are seeing the tools I'm using with Wikipedia and ChatGPT and these different Bible softwares and stuff and seeing, hey, he's not like this genius who just has like this mind that can do things that I can't do. He's somebody who's actually just been practicing a long time doing things that I can do. And now that I'm learning how he's doing it, I don't have to take the 23 years to learn how to do it. I just need to just start putting my hands to it and doing it myself. So I hope you guys are blessed by this and have a great week. Enjoy your Sunday. God bless you. Amen. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.